Welcome to the enchanting world of Bella Brown's historical Western romance. I'm delighted to share this journey with you today. Before we ride into the story, if you enjoy these narrations, please consider subscribing to this channel. It's a small gesture that makes a big difference, and your support makes it possible to continue bringing these heartfelt tales to listeners everywhere, completely free of charge. Now find yourself a comfortable spot, close your eyes if you wish, and allow your imagination to travel back to the American frontier, where adventure and romance await. This audiobook presentation features The Doctor's Christmas Remedy by Bella Brown, all rights reserved. Prologue. Advert number 18. Rather handsome rancher seeks a desirable companion for correspondence courtship, only son of wealthy parents. The right applicant must be healthy and affectionate, good-natured, and pretty, between the ages of 19 to 25. She must be a believer in God and not given to scandal, but a brilliant woman who will endeavor to make a happy home. Photographs exchanged. Object: matrimony. Dear Advert number 18, please forgive the rude introduction, but the advert I saw in the April edition of the Matrimonial News failed to print your name, so I shall make the introductions myself. My name is Zoe Crabtree. I originally hail from the city of Chicago, Illinois, but currently live in New York. I am 26 years of age. I realize that my age places me outside of the limits as stated in the advert, but my father built his physician business on the saying, "If you don't ask, you don't get." You see, he came from a poor family, but he had an apt for reading and a quick mind, the same attributes that I am blessed with. He worked very hard in his life and longed to be a doctor. But how could that be when he didn't have the money? I believe that we have a path to follow, and asking for God's help is just one way to find our destiny. Sometimes God places things in our way for a reason. It was this chance meeting that changed the course of my father's life. I am unsure of the exact details, but the story goes a little like this. A man lay in the road amidst the aftermath of this terrible accident, crying out in pain. My father assisted him. His ability to remain calm and follow the injured man's instructions explicitly led to the grateful man offering my father a place in his anatomy class. My father had saved a brilliant doctor, a skilled surgeon, no less. My father now has a thriving business, but as his only daughter, it has been an uphill struggle to get an education of my own in medicine. I am training to be a doctor in New York. It was strange moving away from home, but my desire to become a doctor has far outweighed my fears of being away from home. My two brothers have been welcomed into the medical field with open arms. As a woman, society dictates that I am not welcome to tend to the sick. People refuse to see me, unless it is only for the opportunity to ridicule a woman doctor. I am expected to find a mate and settle down to a life of domesticity. Now, for some honesty, I am looking for a way to begin a new life with my many healing skills in a place far from prejudice and scorn. It occurred to me that I might find a man with an open mind out west. After all, many people have encroached on the frontier to forge a life for themselves and claim new lands. Your advert caught my eye because you stated you're looking for a brilliant woman. It stuck in my mind as I browsed the many adverts. Initially, I dismissed it because of the age parameters, but I thought, if you don't ask, you don't get. So, advert number 18. How would you define brilliance in a woman? I enclose my address should you choose to reply and ease my questioning mind. Z. Crabtree. Dear Miss Crabtree, I shall admit that your questioning letter was surprisingly eloquent. It was a pleasant reprieve from the many correspondences full of wretched young women begging for my help because I'd foolishly included in that advertisement that I was wealthy. I certainly lived to rue that decision. Your letter was so amusing that it played on my mind for most of the day. I have read your letter more than once ever since I received it. I am intrigued by the mind behind such provocative prose. At first, I cast it aside because I am already in correspondence with another woman about the subject of matrimony. Yet here I sit writing to you. In answer to the question of how I define brilliance in a woman, I must refer to my own life experiences. My mother was a brilliant woman. She raised a family and built a home and a life for us all. even after my father had passed away. She was witty and commanded a room and was a devoted Christian woman throughout her life. Though I'm not sure how she'd feel about a woman training to be a doctor, and I realize that I am yet to introduce myself. My name is Frank Solomon. The ranch I own is in Colorado. It started as a homestead, and my father accumulated more land, merging neighboring properties until his cattle range was the largest in the territory. There is a rumor that he came by the biggest piece of land after a poker game with the neighboring rancher, a man named Tanner, though my mama always insists my PA never gambled a day in his life. My mother passed away last year. One of my biggest regrets was that I was unable to give her the one thing an older woman seems to covet, and that's grandchildren. My time was always taken up by the business of owning cattle, sheep, horses, and chickens. A whole menagerie of animals that reside on our land tend to take up my entire day. On top of that, I have cowhands that help, though sometimes managing them is a bit like herding ducks. They all have a gripe or two about their jobs. I am writing this by candlelight. The window is open, and the scent of columbine and tulips is drifting through on the evening air. The garden was started by my granddaddy's second wife, Ada. There is nothing like the sight of a wildflower meadow during the spring here in Colorado. I hope that this answers your question. I'm not sure if you wish to reply. After all, this is not the romantic reply that you may have been hoping for. Yours sincerely, F. Solomon, Big Oak Ranch, Yellow Creek, Colorado. Dear Mr. Solomon, thank you for your interesting reply. I must admit at first, I was puzzled as to why you'd taken the time to reply when there was no romantic intent on your side. After all, that was the whole point of my reaching out to you in the first place. However, after a discussion with my good friend Betty Hart, she pointed out that I was already invested because your letter had dominated our chat over our tea. Is it possible for a man and a woman to be friends? Aside from the anatomical differences, wouldn't people speculate? How would your new pen friend react to the news that she isn't the object of your attention entirely? That said, I am open to the opportunity to read more about life in a place that isn't that well known. Perhaps you can send more details about your ranch. Maybe we should fill our letters with our daily activities if we are not to be romantically linked. I think that this would be more favorable. My day today was spent assisting in a tricky mastoid surgery. I was one of the two interns. The other was a male. He fainted on the first incision, though I did my best to hide my glee at this event. It might appear to be small-minded to find joy in another's discomfort, but I am not inclined to impress you with my female delicacies. My amusement was soon forgotten when the surgeon explained the blood supply and the facial nerve that could result in paralysis should it be severed. I await your response, Z. Crabtree. Dear Miss Crabtree, the surgery sounded interesting, though I find it hard to picture such a thing. Do you often assist in such events? How do the other men feel about you having such a pastime? It's summer here at Big Oak Ranch. Summer is our busiest season, what with calving and branding, smes before moving the livestock, and selling what we need to. Days are long and hot, and the bunkhouse is full of cowhands who love nothing more than to spend their wages at the saloon, amusing themselves with the local girls, no doubt. I don't want a life like that. I want children to be able to hand down this ranch, the same way my granddaddy did to me. Is this something that you'd want? Roy, my chief cowhand, managed to get himself thrown off in a stampede. He's lucky he survived, though we had a good while to wait for the doc to arrive, so maybe there is a call for your services here after all. I'm not sure what the men would do about a woman telling them what to do, though. F. Solomon. Dear Frank, I know that you insisted I call you this in your last 3 letters, but it still feels a little strange seeing those letters in print. Just a quick letter between classes. We've been exchanging letters for almost 3 months, and your words are becoming a normal part of my daily routine. Betty made a joke about the postman wearing a path to the door of our house, though I cannot fathom you having to travel into the town to collect your mail. I suppose I take for granted the conveniences of living in a city. I'm glad you didn't take my comments about how I believe it's possible to be a wife and a doctor, and that I leave it in the hands of the Lord whether He blesses me with a child. I have nothing against having a child, but I believe they should complement a life that a married couple has together. Not everyone is blessed in that manner, and the couple should have a solid relationship to withstand the heartache that not having a child can sometimes bring. I'm afraid I could not comment on whether your local doctor did a good enough job without examining Roy for myself. You know how I feel about such antiquated medical practices, though I would guess that my opinion wouldn't hold much sway there either. It pleases me to hear that Roy has recovered, though. Zoe. Dear Zoe, well, you were right. I happened to mention to the young lady I was writing to about our correspondence, and she fairly saw fit to lose her mind. Luckily, I didn't have to see it firsthand. Nothing worse than a woman having a hissy fit to make a man get on his horse and head for the hills. The woman in question didn't take kindly to my letter. Needless to say, I have ended any romantic link with her. I did try and let her down as easily as I could, though, and made up a story about having to leave the country. I know that you said your feelings weren't clear and that you were enjoying the friendship, though I can't help but think of you joining me here one day. Victor Tanner, the neighbor I was telling you about, continues to be a stone in my shoe. He will stop at nothing to get what he wants, which is currently the piece of land that adjoins a section of my land. He is ambitious and greedy. His poor wife probably up and died on him to get away. What are your plans as your graduation nears? I'm hoping your response is that you are thinking about me as I think of you. Frank. Dear Frank, the fall is here, and the leaves have turned, though I barely have time to enjoy such things. I am just about to graduate, a joy that has taken me such a long time and a battle to achieve. My father and brothers will be in attendance, and my colleagues have gone as far as to congratulate me as well. I hope that this is a sign that they are beginning to accept working alongside a woman in the hospital. Now, it just comes to finding a position as a doctor somewhere in this country, though there are positions that could become available as far away as Great Britain, where they have a wonderful doctor's program in London and Edinburgh. My father was furious when I mentioned that I had approached the head of surgery on such a program, but he doesn't have to contend with the snide remarks from his coworkers. Maybe one day we will be in a position where a woman can take on such a role without the need to defend her choices. I hope that George is walking about okay after the broken bones. Zoe, dearest. Zoe, when I saw your comments about leaving, they did not sit well with me. It left me feeling angry most of the day, and whilst I'm not a man to be sentimental, it made me realize that I've come to look forward to your letters and that I don't want you to leave. I want you to come here, to live with me, and to build a life here for us and for the children that we will share. I bet that you could even try and find work here. It would be better than beating your head against a brick wall trying to find a permanent position at one of those fancy hospitals when we have a real need for medical help here. I shall stop writing to you if you so wish, but I look forward to your replies, and you shall surely break my heart if you say no. Yours, Frank. Dear Frank, I am delighted to see that you have finally seen just how important my work is to me, and why I need to find a way to live alongside a man who is accepting of my choices. I too look forward to our letters, and want you to know that I hold you in the fondest of ways. I think that we could have a life in Yellow Creek together, with you working the ranch and my helping the sick and the needy. The dream I have fills me with the hope that I have been lucky enough to find an understanding man who will allow me to do the work that makes my heart sing. I shall hold off on any further applications in the meantime. You do mean a lot to me, and I enjoy our verbiage. My father says it's because I need a strong character to keep me in line, though I'm not sure that I concur with such a sentiment. Zoe, dearest. Zoe, Merry Christmas. This is the last one that we shall spend apart now that you have accepted my marriage proposal. As soon as the snow thaws enough for travel, I look forward to welcoming you here at Big Oak Ranch and starting our new life together. My parents had a spring wedding, and I followed not long after, so who knows? Maybe this time next year I shall have a son of my own to teach the ways of the ranch too, God willing. Enclosed are the postal orders for your travel. Yours, Frank. Chapter 1. Dust motes spun dizzily in the shaft of spring sunshine that poured through the window, making the dress's soft gray silk material almost glow where the light touched it. Zoe Solomon's breath hitched in her chest at the sight. 2 years seemed to have passed her by without incident, and yet so much had changed. She quickly stowed away the neat black dress in her hand and shut the closet door. The woman who'd worn that gray wedding dress had been full of high hopes and dreams, and she seemed eons away from the woman who now hurried from her bedchamber and down the stairs. The ranch house was eerily quiet. Dark wooden furniture lined the hallway, adorned with the ornamental touches from days gone by off people that she'd never met. The polished flooring was punctuated with animal skin rugs from Frank's hunting days. She stepped around them. None of the decor had ever been to her taste, though Frank had been a stubborn man and detested change of any kind. The sudden rapping at the front door gave her a jolt, and she had to swallow her shriek. Wiping her palms down the front of her plain brown dress, she crossed the hallway and opened the door. Mr. Tanner, Zoe didn't bother to hide her scorn. To what do I owe the dubious honor? Victor Tanner's mouth lifted to one side, and he nodded. Mrs. Solomon, I came to pay my respects. Zoe's brow shot up, and she folded her arms. You and my husband made no bones about the fact that you detested each other. Don't you think it's a little late to try and make amends? Frank was buried this morning. Victor Tanner's grin was unrepentant. Ma'am, I can only put your hostile tone down to grief. Frank and I had a history, you're correct, but I respected him as an adversary. I shall miss our sparring bouts over the lands and such. Zoe's mouth firmed, but she remained mute, blinking steadily at their neighbor. Victor's eyes grew cool under her continual gaze. I called by here to check in on you is all. Victor used his thumbs to tug at the belt under his rotund belly. Thank you for your concern, but I will be okay, Zoe replied. You certain? It's dangerous for a little lady out here all by herself. That insidious grin crawled across his lined face again. Might be you'll be looking for some company. I'm just here to offer my services, should that be the case. Zoe frowned. Are you asking me to step out with you? Yellow teeth flashed, and he shrugged bashfully. What's wrong with asking? Zoe's mouth dropped open at his audacity. I buried my husband less than 3 hours ago, Mr. Tanner. His body isn't even cold in his grave, and here you are trying to fill his boots? How dare you? You're an attractive woman, Zoe. We could be good together. Anger simmered in her blood, and the emotion felt all that keener when mixed with her alarm over how she would run the ranch in Frank's absence. No doubt there would be speculation from the local folk. She'd experienced their prejudices when she'd arrived in Yellow Creek, and continued to do so because she was an outsider to them. How do you expect to run all of this alone, Zoe? Victor asked, as though reading her mind, and he gestured behind him. Zoe's eyes tracked the sweep of his hand, taking in the familiar lines of the barn and stables, the bunkhouse and the rolling fields beyond that were crisscrossed by barbed wire fencing. The ranch was huge, and she had no clue where to even start with what had always been Frank's domain. The odious neighbor was simply pointing out what had been hovering at the edges of her mind since she'd been informed of the accident that robbed her of a husband. Scent. For a moment, she wanted to give in to the panic clawing at her throat. The bunkhouse was near enough empty now, but come the summer months, they would hire cowhands to help brand and drive the herd they'd sold at market to meet the cattle trucks. That money would buy what they needed to carry them through next winter. Fields needed tending and crops needed planting. She'd have to buy seed and check the farm equipment. She'd always been made to take a back seat by Frank. Her job was to run the house and bear his children. At least, that's what he'd told her right after they'd stepped out of the church and into the sunshine. All those promising words of helping her be a doctor here had vanished into the ether. She was a wife. That was all she'd ever amount to. I'll manage, her voice was husky, and she cleared her throat. Roy and his men know what to do. They did most of the work for Frank. Under his tutelage, Victor pressed on, talking over her thready voice. A woman for a boss? Can't say as I know of many men who'd accept that around here. You hail from the east, from a city no less. Victor rocked back on his heels, triumph curling his lips. I'm here to offer you help, Zoe. The way his eyes lingered on her body felt as though 1,000 bedbugs were crawling across her skin, and she instinctively hunched her shoulders. He reached out a hand to her. I can be good to you. She leaned back out of his reach and gripped the edge of the door, ready to slam it in his face if he came any closer. Please leave, Mr. Tanner. He snatched his hand back, eyes glinting with irritation. You have no place being on this land without a man. His words cut through the cloudy hysteria. Too many times she'd been told that she couldn't. When she'd stepped into that classroom in New York, the medical tang of antiseptic was mixed with the decaying cadavers spread out on the tables. She'd put up with the judgment of her peers back then, mockery in their eyes. You're just a woman. You have no place being here. And she'd come through that ordeal, and she'd qualified, despite all that she had against her. She could get through this. Her chin came up, and her spine stiffened with the tight smile that she sent him. Thank you, Mr. Tanner. For a minute there, I'd forgotten who I was. Pardon me? Good day to you, Mr. Tanner, Zoe replied, and firmly closed the door. She heard the grumbling beyond the wood that she leaned against and picked out the muttered insult. It wasn't until she heard his footsteps moving away from the door that she let out her breath. Somewhere in the belly of the house, she heard a door slam, and she straightened up. The solitude that she'd hoped to find by leaving the churchyard before everyone else moved further away, as the po-faced housekeeper, Mrs. Stewart, rushed into the hallway, drawing up short when she spotted Zoe at the front door. Mrs. Stewart's dour expression deepened. Was that Victor Tanner I saw racing past me in a cloud of dust? It was, Zoe replied blandly. What was he doing here? Zoe had once made the mistake of confiding in the housekeeper about Frank's complete refusal to allow her to treat an injured cowhand, calling her husband mulish and pig-headed in his manner. The next day, Frank blasted her with fury over her indiscretion, and Zoe was given a lesson about where the housekeeper's loyalties lay. Since then, she'd kept the housekeeper at a distance. Paying his respects, apparently, Zoe replied evenly. The downturned mouth twisted. As if that man knew the meaning of the word respect. I looked for you after the interment, but Butch said you'd left. That's right, Zoe said. I needed some time to myself. Mrs. Stewart fisted her hands and placed them on her wide hips. But you had guests. Mr. Solomon would have wanted his wife to thank people for attending. It's not proper. What will people think? Zoe rubbed at the dull ache pulsing at her temple. Quite frankly, Mrs. Stewart, I couldn't care a fig about what people think. I was there to bury my husband. Keeping up appearances for appearances' sake was not high on the agenda. As it was, there were fewer people than she'd expected in the church at the edge of the town. Although Frank owned a large chunk of local land, his cantankerous nature was notorious. It hardly invited gushing eulogies or lamenting over his sudden loss of life. Well, the old woman's mouth flapped. I would have expected his wife to at least shed a tear at the graveside. Agnes Reed said as much to me, and if she'd noticed, you can rest assured that the rest of the town knows it by this evening. I'm grieving in my own way, Mrs. Stewart. Zoe's voice was firm enough to make the housekeeper throw her hands up. I shall get back to my work then, she said. That won't be necessary, Zoe said. I know how devoted you were to Frank and his family. You can take the day off, Mrs. Stewart. Her eyes widened. I shall do no such thing. I have a duty of care to this house, to Mr. Solomon's memory. I won't sully his memory by shirking my responsibilities. I'd quite like to be alone, Zoe tried again. Connie Stewart's pinched expression succeeded in making Zoe feel like she'd struck the woman. But my place is here, at Big Oak. And you will continue to hold that position, Mrs. Stewart, just not today. Very well, she muttered and huffed her way back towards the kitchen. Zoe waited until the back door slammed back into the frame before she allowed her tears to fall. For too long, she'd felt like there were eyes everywhere in this house. She crossed the hallway and opened the door to Frank's den. In it, He had a desk and chair placed next to the window. It had a small stove in the far corner that he'd lit to warm himself when he'd worked late, and a walnut cabinet opposite where he kept papers and his whiskey. She hovered at the threshold of the room, the smell of leather and man assaulting her senses. This had been his domain, the room where he'd conduct his business, or retreat to after they'd argued. It was strange to think that she wouldn't hear his gravely laugh again, for she had loved him. Why else had she agreed to marry him? But the man she'd fallen in love with in their letters was not the man who'd lived in this house. The real Frank Solomon had grown angry with her when a child hadn't been forthcoming after more than a year of trying. With her medical training, she was able to cite many reasons why a baby hadn't happened just yet. She'd begged him to be patient and to pray with her. He'd accused her of using her medical knowledge to not have a baby, of using his position in Yellow Creek to try and build a medical business instead of being his wife. Their irate words echoed through her mind as she wandered around the room, his scent surrounding her. It wasn't the comfort she needed, and it made her ache even more. She'd wanted to give him a baby and had turned herself inside out to prove to him that she hadn't been taking any such herbs. Maybe that's why he'd had spies everywhere. He'd been trying to catch her out. He'd called her cold and callous because she didn't cry. She had, just never in front of anyone. Her fingertips danced over the green leather blotter and the parchment paper on it. Her eyes dwelt upon his ink well and paperweight. Prosody were bittersweet. Her tears were bittersweet because she had loved him deeply one time. Now, when she was all alone, she could admit that she hadn't liked him very much in the past few months. She came to a stop in front of his walnut cabinet. The light shining through the glass decanter atop the cabinet turned the silver salver under it an amber color, the same as the whiskey. She sniffed and poured herself a glug. She held the glass up, watching the light and liquid dance swirl with the movement. The old leather desk chair creaked in protest as she sat down, as though it too objected to her presence in Frank's space. "What sway did you have on my husband?" she spoke to the glass. Frank had changed in the past year. His drinking had become more noticeable, and his mood more changeable. He'd grown mean. Was this drink the reason for his belligerence? She raised the glass to her lips, just as the door behind her opened. Chapter 2. Zoe whirled at the sound, terror clutching at her throat as she braced for her husband's wrath, but instead she faced the housekeeper, her lined face slack with disapproval. "Mrs. Solomon." Zoe swapped the glass between her hands. She licked whiskey off her thumb where it had slopped over the sides. She grimaced at the sour taste and coughed. "You startled me. I thought you'd left for the day?" "Mrs. Lop?" Stewart drew herself upright as she sucked in a breath through pinched nostrils, her hawk-like gaze moving from the glass back to Zoe's pink face. "I came back to give you a message that I forgot to mention." Those keen eyes danced around the room. Zoe wondered if she was checking to see if anything else was out of place. She quickly set the glass down and surreptitiously wiped her hand on her dress. "Okay?" "Mr. Phillips stopped me as he was leaving the church. He said he will be in his office from 10 o'clock on Tuesday." "Why would I need to see the bank manager?" Mrs. Stewart's face pinched. "The property belongs to you now. You will have to sign to make withdrawals to pay the workers, settle accounts and such. I would imagine that's what it's about." She rattled the door handle as she cast another look about the den. "But then you've wasted no time tucking into his whiskey, so it won't be too big a leap to make to dip into his bank balance." The door slammed shut before Zoe could gather herself enough to make a reply. She listened to the retreating steps before she lowered herself into the chair. She scrubbed at her face, responsibilities pressing in all around her. She would have to learn, and quickly, how to run a ranch when the truth was she'd rarely taken an interest in it. She'd tried to when she'd first arrived, but working out land yields and the cost of trading in beef hadn't interested her. She was more concerned with the care and welfare of the people who work his lands. When it became obvious to her that Frank had no intention of supporting her dream of working as a doctor, but instead wanted her to patch up or mask the injury an animal had sustained so that he could quickly sell it on, that was when the argument started. The day he'd confiscated her leather doctor's case was seared into her memory. The black bag had been a gift from her father and held great sentimental value. Frank had pulled it from her grasp and told her that he was going to burn it. She'd never seen it since. Now she was going to have to work out how to live without him on this huge ranch. She needed a plan to fend off the vultures like Victor Tanner that circled the place. She had no intention of ever marrying again. Frank had not been the man that she'd hoped for, and she'd had to try and pretend that she was happy here at Big Oak almost as soon as she'd arrived here. She would never put herself in that position ever again. The next morning, Zoe woke late. She'd forgotten to close the drapes, and the gray skies full of rain suited her solemn mood. Her head felt woolly from crying, and her eyes were gritty from broken sleep that had been peppered with dreams. She dressed slowly, trying to formulate a strategy about how she would run the ranch and manage everything else that came with it. It was only when she heard the housekeeper calling her name that she tied the laces on her boots. With a sigh, she left her bedchamber and called a reply to Mrs. Stewart when the housekeeper's tone grew more insistent. Zoe frowned when she rounded the top of the staircase and paused. The older woman was standing in the center of the hallway. No breakfast scents were filling the house, no coffee, and the housekeeper's apron was absent. Instead, she wore her good coat. "Mrs. Stewart?" Zoe walked down a few steps, her frown deepening when she noticed how fidgety the other woman was. "Are you well?" "I'm fine," Mrs. Stewart retorted in a clipped tone. "I expected you to be up early with how much there is to do about the house. Mr. Solomon rose early every day. In fact, he would have had half his workday completed by the time I arrived here to start my work." Zoe bit back the tart reply that wanted to spring forth, and she descended the rest of the stairs. It was only when she joined the housekeeper at floor level that she noticed the valise by the front door. "Are you going somewhere?" Mrs. Stewart appeared to brace herself with her short sigh, and she held out a long, ornate key. "Here you go." Zoe didn't move. "What's that?" "The key to my cabin." Mrs. Stewart avoided her eyes and focused on the piece of iron that dangled from her outstretched hand. Zoe swallowed as the cold fingers of trepidation trickled through her gut. "That cabin comes with your post, Mrs. Stewart." "I know." Mrs. Stewart cleared her throat. I resign." She nodded once to affirm her words. "But why?" This time, the sigh she released was louder and more exaggerated. "I cannot work for a drinker, Mrs. Solomon. I just won't." Zoe's mouth rounded with shock. "I'm not a drinker. I saw you with my own eyes last night. And don't you go denying it." The housekeeper's voice vibrated with indignation. "I buried my husband yesterday, Connie," Zoe said softly. "And I didn't touch the drink. I poured it back into the bottle." Mrs. Stewart folded her arms, disbelief pulling at her mouth. "A likely story." "It's true," Zoe cried. "Besides, Frank was a drinker and you worked happily for him, for years. He's a man, and that's reason enough." Connie dropped her gaze and smoothed out her skirts, ruminating on her response. Mr. Solomon was a good employer, one who commanded loyalty. Her eyes came up briefly before moving away once more. The unspoken intimation that Zoe wasn't as good as her late husband spoke volumes and cut her to the core. She knew that she'd always been at loggerheads with the other woman, but hadn't expected this. "I don't have the first clue how to run this ranch, Mrs. Stewart. You are the backbone of this place. You cook for the ranch hands and pay the accounts. I need your help. Won't you stay, at least until I'm on my feet, please?" "If you'd have made more of an effort around here, instead of clinging on to the life you had back east, perhaps you would have learned the right way to live out here." "I tried, Mrs. Stewart." Zoe's voice grew rough with emotion. "I tried every day to conform to how Frank wanted me to live. I came here with dreams of being a doctor. Women shouldn't hanker after a man's position. It just isn't the way things are done." Anger rippled through Zoe. The discrimination that she'd spent the duration of her marriage trying to push past was frustrating. "I can do just as well as a man can in most areas, Mrs. Stewart. You didn't even try to be a good wife to him. He gave you everything." I'd remind you that your view of my husband was skewed with this peculiar bias for him, Zoe snapped, interrupting the devoted diatribe that the other woman traipsed out every time in her unyielding defense of Frank. He could do no wrong in your eyes, even though he could be cruel and callous when he chose. And Frank was a drinker. It changed him. You know this. You just won't admit that he could be flawed. I poured the drink last night, trying to understand what thrall it held over him. It also went back into the bottle, Mrs. Stewart. I tried to be a good wife to him. I swear I did. I wanted to bear his children. I loved him once upon a time. The housekeeper's lips compressed, and the key was raised once more. My mind is made up. I've already written to my sister, and I'll stay with her for a while. There are plenty of jobs where she lives, and I'm not afraid of hard work. Zoe ignored the look that was laden with the suggestion that she was lazy, but she refused to rise to the bait. Well, you'll need a reference. I shall write one for you. The housekeeper fidgeted more. Mr. Solomon was decent enough to write one for me 2 years ago. Zoe felt like she'd been sucker punched. 2 years ago, when I arrived here. She'd once hoped that the housekeeper would take her under her wing and show her the ropes of running such a grand ranch, but she'd never quite managed to breach the wall that the housekeeper had around herself. If anything, the love Connie Stewart had for Frank was almost a possessive, motherly one. And Zoe always felt as though she'd fallen short of the other woman's expectations of how a wife should behave. She took the key from her, lowering her gaze and willing herself not to give in to the tears that scorched the backs of her eyes. I'm sure Mr. Solomon would want me to thank you for your years of loyal service to Big Oak Ranch. Zoe wanted to try and plead her case again. As much as they despised each other, she needed the housekeeper's help in keeping the ranch going. The housekeeper sent her a tight smile from near the front door, and Zoe knew that any pleas would be futile, judging by the look on her face. From what I gleaned after my conversation with Victor Tanner yesterday, I'm sure that he will be warming Mr. Solomon's side of the bed soon enough. By the time Zoe had found her voice, the housekeeper had slammed her way out of the house and was partway down the drive. Zoe was now left wondering how she would deal with the rumors that were bound to flourish in this small town, as well as running a business. Chapter 3. Zoe stared inside the pantry. The shelves were almost bare, although she had to admit that she'd rarely looked inside the store cupboards. She hadn't been permitted to look, so maybe this was how Mrs. Stewart had kept the food stores, at minimal levels. She could well believe it of her miser husband. He wouldn't spend a single cent more than he had to. In the 2 days since Connie Stewart had walked out, Zoe had been left scrambling to pick up the slack. It was spring, and the bunkhouse was half full of hungry cowhands who'd been tending to the stock under the watchful eye of Roy Sutter, the chief ranch hand. As mean as Mrs. Stewart had been to her, Zoe had spoken the truth when she'd told the housekeeper that she'd been the backbone of the place. Everything had run like clockwork under her firm guidance, even down to the unruly ranch hands. None of them would have dared voice a complaint to her or about her. The older woman had certainly made running the house look a darn sight easier than it was. Zoe lifted out what was left of the ham hock. She'd chop it up and add it to the vegetables and stock to make a stew. She'd even make another attempt at baking bread today. Yesterday's endeavor had been abandoned after black smoke had billowed from the stove, and she'd had to leave the kitchen through the back door. She set the platter with the meat on the side and searched in the narrow drawer for the flint block to sharpen the knife when she heard a ruckus coming from the yard. She went back to the kitchen window and frowned. Several of the cowhands were milling about, their raised voices muffled through the glass. It was the bedrolls and canvas sacks that were hanging off their horses that made her feel a little uneasy. She opened the back door and stepped out onto the porch, wiping her hands on her apron. "Roy?" she called out to the chief ranch hand. His sheepish look did nothing to appease her sense of apprehension. "Mrs. Solomon." He murmured something to Butch, another of the cowhands that had worked at the ranch for as long as she'd been there. Her eyes moved over the others gathered in the yard, and she saw some of the newer cowhands emerging from the bunkhouse, laden down with blankets and other belongings. "Is there a cattle drive already?" Roy nudged the brim of his hat back and pulled a face. "No, ma'am." "Oh," Zoe gave a nervous jolt. "Then where are you all going? It looks as though you're all packing up and getting ready to leave for the drive." Roy scratched at his brow and then pulled his hat back down. "Ma'am, you see, it goes a little something like this." His voice trailed off. Zoe folded her arms and cocked a brow at him, knowing that she wasn't going to like what he was about to say. "Like what, Roy?" she asked when he didn't continue. "Well, men like us, we're in demand, what with our experience and all." His eyes darted about the group, and she caught the encouraging nod that Willie Watts was giving him. Zoe felt like she was the only person not being let in on the big secret, and she didn't like the sensation at all. Butch came to stand alongside his superior. "We've had a better offer, is what Roy is trying to tell you." "I was getting to it," Roy muttered out of the side of his mouth. "What do you mean a better offer?" She narrowed her eyes. "From whom?" "Victor Tanner," Willie called out, tugging on a leather strap. Zoe took a step back as though she'd been struck. The leering grin of her odious neighbor swam in her mind as her heart began to pound. She needed these men. She needed their skills and their knowledge. She would get the hang of the house, but she required them to manage the animals. "What?" She stared aghast at Roy. "After everything you said against that dreadful man to Frank, I heard you with my ears, Roy, casting aspersions on him. And now you're going to work for him." Roy gave a dismissive shrug. "Things have changed." "Is it money?" she asked. "I can pay you more money. I was supposed to go to see Mr. Phillips at the bank today, but after Mrs. Stewart left the way she did, I just haven't been able to. Once the paperwork is all taken care of, we can negotiate." "It's not the money," Roy cut her off. He exchanged a look with his men before meeting her eye. "We don't want to work for a woman." Zoe had to take a moment to breathe, pressing a hand to her ribs to try and ease the tightness in her chest. "Roy, I'm the same person I was last week. We worked for Frank Solomon, not a drinker who hops into bed with their neighbor as soon as her husband is in the ground," Willie said. "I did no such thing," Zoe cried, indignant tears tightening her throat. "I don't know who is spreading these vicious lies, but I have a good idea who." There was only one person who could gain anything by blackening her name so that she'd have no choice but to go to him and save her reputation. The way we hear it, it's only a matter of time before you're going to be Zoe Tanner, so we may as well get the change over and done with now," Butch muttered as he wandered off to where his horse was tied up. Zoe's fists clenched at her sides. "If you wish to align yourselves with a scoundrel such as Victor Tanner, then you go right ahead and pack up your stuff. Get off my land, and I hope that you can sleep at night knowing that you're all utter hypocrites." Instead of slinking back to the bunkhouse with a flea in their ears to unpack and return to work, the men mounted their horses. One by one, they rode out of the yard. A couple touched their hats to her as they rode on by, but not even one of them spoke to her. She waited until the last of them disappeared at the end of the drive before she gave in to the tears. She walked back into the kitchen, shut the door, and then leaned back against it. Of all the things she'd envisioned happening, having her staff walk out on her wasn't one of them. She wiped at her damp eyes with trembling hands, her thoughts tumbling over one another. "That's it. I'm done. How can I ever cope now?" She didn't even know how many heads of steer were on the land, nor where to start to feed them, or where they were each located. And suddenly, she was furious. Inexplicably furious, and there was only one man who deserved her full wrath. She grabbed her shawl and hat and stomped out of the kitchen towards the stables. Victor Tanner's congenial smile belied the glittering assessment that his eyes made as he strolled into his parlor to greet her. "Well, now this is a surprise," he rocked back on his heels. "This isn't a social visit, Victor," Zoe ground out fiercely. "And you can drop the sycophantic act with me. I have no intention of ever stepping out with you, so you can stop your campaign to smear my good reputation." His ingratiating chuckle only annoyed her more, and she desperately clung to her calm exterior. My, Mrs. Solomon, someone has gotten under your bonnet, I see." You are going around spreading malicious gossip about me, starting with my housekeeper. Victor's lips curled, though his eyes were humorless. The way I hear it, she isn't your housekeeper any longer. Because you led her to think that something was going on between you and me when you were leaving my property the other day. Victor stalked across the floor to the small cabinet in the corner. He poured himself a finger of whiskey and threw it back, the glass hitting the table with a resounding clatter that made her jump after he'd emptied it. Then he rounded on her, resentment rolling off him. Suddenly, she became aware that she was alone in his house. Her ranch hands might have watched her storm up the driveway, and the housekeeper may be down the hall, but they would be loyal to Victor and his dollars, not to a lone widow. Zoe sighed. Mr. Tanner, those were my work hands. I need them to run the farm. How much are you paying them? I'll match it. He sucked his teeth as though trying to savor the whiskey. This is business, Zoe. Those men need to know that they'll still have work at the end of the summer. You don't have the first clue about running a ranch. It stands to reason that there will be no ranch left by the end of the summer because you're a woman. Now then. He pushed the edges of his leather coat back and rested his hands on his hips, the arrogant tilt of his jaw mocking her. I made you an offer the other day. I will take on your lands, your stock, and run the place as it should have been for all these years. I will make you a wealthy woman in your own right. All I ask is that you marry me and share my bed. For a fleeting moment, she considered it. It would be easier to hand it all over to him and allow him to take the problems off her hands. Though she also knew that she would be stepping from the frying pan into the fire. She'd believed that she'd gotten to know Frank in the years of writing to him, and he'd turned out to be nothing like the man she thought she knew. Victor Tanner made no secret about who he was. He was brash and arrogant, and eyed her like she was a prize pig to be consumed. He scared her spitless. Think about it, Zoe. Victor walked towards her, and she flinched, retreating until her back met the wall. A man to look after you, keep you safe from all the dangers that could happen. His hand came up, and his knuckle grazed her cheek. Revulsion rocketed through her, and she knocked his hand away. Don't ever touch me, she hissed at him. I might be just a woman, but I'll figure it out for myself. His mocking laughter followed her down the hall as she fled. I'll be here waiting for you, Zoe, whenever you're ready. It was the dog's barking that pulled her from sleep, and she sat up disorientated in the pitch black, blood thundering in her ears. She was alone in the house. There were no more ranch hands to deal with whatever was making the dogs set up a racket like that. She wrestled with indecision. What untold horrors awaited her out there in the darkness? On her lands. Cold night air wrapped around her legs, sending goose flesh racing across her skin as she slipped her feet free from the bed covers and padded across the wooden floor. She peered through the glass into the darkness, ears straining against the terrible barking, though their frantic barks were peppered with a rumbling that seemed to make the ground vibrate beneath her feet. She saw them then, torches held aloft, dancing in the darkness like macabre lightning bugs. She stepped closer to the glass, eyes straining. Men. There were men on her lands, their faces covered. That rumbling noise, she could hear the bellowing of the cattle now, distressed and confused. Her hand flew to her mouth, uncertainty filling her. Rustlers. She was being robbed. Chapter 4. Sheriff, it's been well over a week. Zoe deliberately made her voice snippy to try and communicate her frustration to this dolt voted into office by the men in charge in this town. Are you telling me that none of your men have managed to find my cattle? Sheriff Clifford Moyer picked up on the tone. He pulled himself to his feet, the buckle on his belt straining to hold his pants to his expansive gut. He tugged at the belt and drew in a long breath, letting out a sigh. Mrs. Solomon, as I said to you the other day when you were in here, all excitable, are you sure you just didn't leave the gate open? Zoe tamped down on her temper. No, I didn't, she enunciated. The same as the cattle didn't snip my barbed wire fencing and leave it all over the ground. Ma'am, you couldn't even tell me how many head of cattle were on your lands. How are my men supposed to look for cattle when they don't know how many? or what the big oak brand looked like. Zoe pinched the bridge of her nose. I already told your deputy that there were more than 100. She opened her eyes and glared at the patronizing sheriff. I hadn't checked the records when I came here that morning to report the theft. Seems to me that you should know the numbers, Mrs. Solomon. That's basic business sense. And you made no move to stop the robbery. You admitted to me that you watched them from the bedroom window, but didn't see enough to identify any of these rustlers. He articulated the last word in a derisive tone. Why would I challenge more than 5 men in the dark, Sheriff? Have you taken leave of all your senses? I was simply hoping that as a representative of the law, you'd be galvanized into action. Rustlers in your town, Sheriff? Don't you care? But Zoe could see by the half-lidded stare that he wasn't even listening. I bet if it was Victor Tanner or someone else who'd had his entire herd stolen, you'd be turning over every single pebble in this place to find them. That got his attention, and she saw temper simmering in his bloodshot eyes. Ma'am, I take my job role very seriously. No, you don't, Zoe retorted. One of your citizens was terrorized in her home. I've lost all my stock, and you're sitting here, looking like you're nursing a headache, no doubt caused by the whiskey that I can smell on your breath. Now, are you going to find my herd or not? You can start by looking on Victor Tanner's ranch. I knew Frank for years, so it is out of respect for him that I won't throw you out of here. Clifford Moyer stabbed a chubby finger into his scarred desktop to punctuate his words. You don't go around here tossing out accusations against good men, not in my office. I already told you that Mr. Tanner answered my questions. He didn't hear anything that night. Of course he didn't, Zoe spat. He probably had Roy and Butch come back to perpetrate the crime. No one knows the land better than those two. You can't come in here, all hysterical, dragging the names of good men through the mud. I just won't have it. If it was rustlers, your stock will be halfway across the country by now. I've made inquiries and done my job. We're done here. Zoe stared at him, eyes hot and her throat clogged with anger that boiled inside her. She'd known that seeking help from the sheriff was a long shot. He'd seemed amused by her distress when she'd burst into his office the morning of the robbery. Instead of reassurance, he'd jibed at her for being a woman and forgetful. She'd gone over scenarios where she'd run outside that night, waving a shotgun and screaming like a banshee at the men. But in every scene that she'd pictured, she couldn't see a way out where she would have saved her cattle and kept her virtue. She valued her life more than risking it for cows. He was right. Whoever had stolen her property would have hidden them well. It didn't take much to change the brand mark on cattle or even cut it out. She knew that some ranches would buy stock blatantly belonging to others. Frank had said as much. She wasn't sure how many of the cattle were too young for branding just yet. Her inexperience had just cost her dearly. She shuffled towards the office door, stopping to glare over her shoulder when Clifford Moyer called her name. Next time, check your gates, he chuckled. Zoe made sure to slam the door hard enough to make the frame rattle on her way out. Zoe stared at the bank manager. His black hair shone with the oil he'd used to comb what strands of hair remained across his balding palate. His dark eyes moved fleetingly around the room under her direct look. There's nothing left? He gave a shake of his head. Just a few dollars. Frank he'd taken out a few loans in the past few years. The owners of those loans took the funds to cover his debts. He spread out the offending documents on the desk between them. She'd paid no heed to the business. In all his letters, Frank had claimed to be a savvy ranch owner. The papers scattered in front of her painted a different story. Her husband had been living on a wing and a prayer for some time. Zoe caught the gawp of the young teller who was a few feet away at his counter behind the teller's cage. She ignored him and the idea that her business would no doubt be all over town as soon as the young man finished for the day. So why did you need me to come here if there's nothing left? Mr. Phillips shifted in his seat, laid his forearm on his desk, took it off again, and fidgeted some more. Zoe folded her arms and waited for him to spit out whatever was on his mind. He cleared his throat. Judge Reed called by my home the day after Mr. Solomon died. The land that Frank owned It's valuable. He suggested that you might sell it. Anger licked through her. Now, isn't that convenient? Judge Reed and Victor Tanner are good cohorts. Everyone knows that in town. And now that I have no livestock and now certainly no means with which to purchase any more, I suppose you're going to advise that I should sell to Mr. Tanner. Twin spots of red scored his cheeks. I'm to say that he is willing to purchase it for the right price. You just said a moment ago that the land is valuable, Mr. Phillips. He traced a groove in the desk with his thumbnail, wilting under her temper. It's only as valuable as what you can get for it. Zoe shot to her feet and tugged down the edges of her navy jacket. You're assuming it's for sale. I want to withdraw the money from Frank's account. The bank manager's eyes widened. You do? You said yourself that it's my money now. I wish to withdraw it. All of what's left anyway. The small man rose carefully and nodded once at the teller who opened the cash drawer at his station. Zoe paced in the narrow space behind the counter that spanned the width of the bank, wavering between fury and despair. She'd come into the bank today hoping that she could buy more livestock and tell Victor Tanner to take a running jump into the river. Ever since Frank had died, it was as though she'd been on the back foot and everyone else had control of her life. Ever since she'd set foot in this town, she'd been an outsider to them all. Mr. Percent. Phillips attempted to make small talk with her, but she was too incensed to respond. She'd ridden into town today with the frame of mind to try and get her life into some sort of order. She'd had a mind to place an advert at the post office for a ranch hand. Maybe someone passing through could help teach her what she needed to know. Instead, she was cast further adrift from her plans. She collected up the notes and coins and swept them into her reticule, then stomped out of the bank. On the street, she inhaled sharply and leaned against the rail, blinking rapidly to stave off the wave of hopelessness that threatened to consume her. Noises reached through the fog of shame, and she glanced up. The spring day was unseasonably warm, and the town seemed busier than usual. The cerulean dome overhead was dotted with white clouds being chased by the pleasant breeze that teased her skirts. Wagons and buggies trundled past her. She ducked against the looks that she was drawing where she was folded over the rail. She hurried across the road and along the boardwalk towards the general store. The doorbell jingled pleasantly overhead as she pushed it open, though the sound was lost amongst the cacophony that filled the store. The store owner, a rotund man by the name of Red Perkins, was glowering at the slight woman in front of him. A young boy was pressed against his mother's legs, though the infant squalling in her arms created the most incessant noise. I said no, Red told the young woman, his voice climbing to be heard over the infant. Please, Mr. Perkins, the woman's voice shook with emotion. My children, they haven't eaten in days. That's why she's crying this way. Have a heart, sir. I will pay at the end of the month. He leaned on his beefy arms. You don't work, Millie. That's why the answer is no. I am not a charity. Your children, your situation, that ain't my problem. Zoe had heard enough. She marched up to the counter and stepped in front of the young woman. She could see the few items she'd placed there to buy. I'll pay for her things, Zoe interjected. The young woman stared at her, speechless. Zoe sent her a small smile and gave a slight nod of reassurance. Mrs. Solomon, Red's eyes gleamed. How nice to see you. I suppose you'll be visiting more often now that you fired Mrs. Stewart? Zoe's brows climbed up her head. I did no such thing, Red. Here's my list. Add all of this onto one bill, and I'll pay for everything. She looked back and spotted the small boy peeking from behind his mother's skirts. A glimpse at the yelling infant squeezed her heart. We'll have a little chocolate and some milk, too. Milk? Zoe rounded on the self-righteous store owner, eyes flashing with temper. Seeing as all my livestock was stolen, I have no source of milk. Red didn't move. The way I hear, you don't have any money either. Zoe's lips flattened in frustration, and she sighed. That was another thing that she despised about this town, the gossip. She dug into her purse and waved one of the banknotes. That's enough to cover what I need, and for my young friend here, too. I'm taking this with me. She wiggled one of the slices of bread that Millie must have put on the countertop at him. Pack all this up with my order. We shall be back shortly. She placed an arm around the young woman, the baby's cries now at a piercing pitch, and guided the three of them outside. Outside, Zoe tore the slice of bread in two and handed one piece to the little boy. "Here, eat this." He looked to his mother and then to the bread before his hand shot out and snatched at the food. He crammed it into his mouth. His mother admonished him with a hip bump and a head nod. Meanwhile, Zoe couldn't help the small smile at his muffled thank you around the mouthful of bread. "Thank you, ma'am." Millie jiggled the infant to her, pressing a kiss to the child's head. "I don't know why she cries like this." "She's hungry. She can tell you're upset. Children are a bit like horses. A horse can sense when you're frightened, can't it?" Zoe pushed back the covering on the little girl's face. She was pink and scowled as she wailed. "She might have her teeth cutting through, too." Millie tilted her head. "You know about medicine?" A rueful smile touched Zoe's lips as she pressed the separated crust into the child's balled-up fist. The stick of crust went straight into her mouth, and the silence that followed was bliss. "There," Zoe breathed. "I can hear again. And yes, once upon a time, I knew all about medicine." Millie bounced the infant. "Thank you, ma'am. I don't know how to repay you. I can't reimburse you now, but I will." Zoe looked over three of them. The boy was eyeing up the rest of the bread, licking his lips. She offered it to him, and this time he remembered his manners. "When did you last eat?" Millie ducked her head, her eyes filling with tears. "I've been doing what I can," she replied in a low voice, shame rippling through her. "My Jimmy died a few months back. No one will take on a widow with children. I've been cleaning for a few days at the saloon, but then Libby here started to cry lots, and the customers complained something chronic to Buck, the owner. I was told to git." A widow, just as she was, and this young woman had children too. How much more complicated would her situation have been if she'd had children with Frank and he'd died? The young woman began to weep softly, sniffling and burying her face in the ratty blanket her infant daughter was wrapped in. "You cleaned at the saloon?" Zoe asked. "Yes, ma'am." "How about laundry, cooking? Do you have those skills?" Millie lifted her eyes, brows crunching together. "Of course, ma'am." Zoe rubbed a hand down the back of the little boy who was leaning against her leg. "If you're going to work for me, you can start by not calling me ma'am." Chapter 5. "Are you sure about this?" Millie asked. The other widow looked back at the young boy clinging to the sides in the back of Zoe's wagon before facing forward once more. "Would you rather I take you back to town? You don't even know me. I don't have any references from Buck. I'm not sure he would send one. I'm a hard worker, but you only have my word for that." Zoe had to concentrate on steering around the sharp bend in the road, which gave her a moment to question her rash decision. The truth of it was that she didn't know what had prompted this young woman to offer her a job. "Are you a thief?" Millie blinked at the bluntness. "No." "Do you lie?" "No." "Well then," Zoe shrugged as if that were enough of an interview for her. Millie nuzzled the now sleeping Libby in her arms. "Thank you." "Don't be thanking me too soon." Zoe's tone was grim. "It's a big enough house that we can both live in it. Or there's an empty bunkhouse and another small cabin that the old housekeeper occupied. I can show you all of them, and you can choose which suits you best. I can't pay you much. A visit to the bank this morning has shown me just what dire straits I'm in. But I have shelter, firewood, so you and the children will be warm." Millie sniffed, and Zoe saw that her eyes had grown misty once more. "Thank you, ma'am. I mean Zoe," she corrected after Zoe's pointed look. "I had a housekeeper," Zoe said. "She was cranky and superior. We did not get along, despite my best efforts to please her." "Connie Stewart," Millie said. Zoe's brows curved up. "You knew her?" "By sight. My Jimmy pointed her out. He took a job on the Solomon Ranch when he was younger, long before he ever met me. She went to church every Sunday. She seemed tough. Jimmy said that she didn't suffer fools. I'd say your husband was a good judge of character." Millie smiled wistfully, her gaze on the road ahead. "He'd have liked that assessment." "What happened to him?" "He got sick last winter. We couldn't afford a doctor. I did what we could with the things we had in the cabin." Her voice grew softer with each word. Zoe knew that the doctor who tended to the sick charged hefty prices, which excluded many of the families whose income relied on the seasonal work of the local ranches. That was why so many of the cowhands were transients, following the work according to the weather. It was another reason why she'd accepted Frank's proposal, because she could have made a difference here. "I'm sorry for your loss," Zoe murmured. "You too," Millie offered. "Jimmy said that Frank was a good boss." Zoe's mouth tightened when she thought about the state of the business and the number of bank loans her husband had taken out since she'd arrived at Yellow Creek. Loans that had left her in such a precarious state now. It was still difficult to correlate with the successful businessman he'd portrayed himself as. She could only hazard a guess where the money had gone. Zoe made a non-committal murmur, unwilling to besmirch Frank's reputation. She was almost certain that the other ranch owners and wealthy men in town were doing that job already. "We're almost there," Zoe said, thankful to be able to change the subject. The stone chimney of the house peeped through the familiar tree line. The flattened roof of the bunkhouse and the red apex of the barn came next. Besides them, Solomon land spread out on either side of the road, marked by post and rail fencing. "That's where we're going to live?" The small voice behind her was full of wonder. Zoe's lips twitched at the tone, reminiscent of when she'd first seen the ranch house herself. "Yes, it is." Millie smiled at her son. "Are you excited, Petey?" "Kinda," he replied. "Do you have dogs? Do they bite? I don't like dogs that bite." "I have a few dogs. Yes, they're friendly enough." Petey scrambled closer to where the women were sitting on the bench, looping his arms over the backrest as he gazed around him. "All of this is yours?" "It is." "How many acres?" "My daddy once worked on a ranch that was almost 1,000 acres. "This is the same ranch," Millie said, and Petey's eyes lit up. "Pa worked here?" "Yes, but before Miss Zoe arrived." "Where are all your animals?" he asked, looking over the empty paddocks and fields. "Are they in another place right now? 'Cause cows have their babies in the spring. They should be closer to the house. My pa told me so. He was the best cowhand before he died." Millie chided her son gently over the pertinent questions. Judging by the look that she gave her son, Millie had heard about Zoe's missing herd. "Sorry," Millie murmured. "He gets excited." "It's okay." Zoe dismissed the comment with a wave as she turned into the short, wide drive of the ranch. "That's how he learns." Millie turned in her seat. "Miss Zoe's cattle were all stolen." "They were?" He swung a wide-mouthed gaze between the women. "Pesky rustlers." "It wasn't rustlers," Millie said, and ducked her head at the direct look Zoe gave her as she pulled the wagon to a stop. Petey gasped and flopped back into the wagon bed. "Golly, you must be real mad. Do you know who's stolen them?" "We would say who stole them," Millie corrected him. "Do you know who it was?" Zoe asked her quietly. "Why don't you go and explore, Petey?" Millie said over her shoulder. "Stay where I can see you until we know what's what." Petey didn't need to be told twice. He leaped off the back and ran towards the stables, his legs pumping furiously. Millie watched him go, darting from the stables to the outhouses and exploring each space. "He reminds me so much of his pa. It makes my heart hurt," she said. "He's a ball of energy, that's certain." Zoe tracked the child's movements, thinking about how she'd have to get used to sharing her space with smaller people now. "I don't know who took your stock, but I have an idea," she said. Zoe remembered the implications from Connie and the bank manager. "Rumors are going about town about my involvement with Victor Tanner." Millie didn't deny it. For what it's worth, not many people believe them. Frank was seen in the saloons. Those people know that he changed after he drank his whiskey. The sympathy that shone from the other woman's face made Zoe's eyes burn. She broke the look as a wave of humiliation moved through her. Millie shifted in her seat. "I wouldn't like to cast aspersions on a man's good character," she said in a mild tone. "Of course, he has to have a good character to speak of in the first place." Zoe's quick look found Millie's eyes twinkling, and it eased the tight band in her chest. Millie continued. "I don't know if Mr. Tanner had anything to do with your cattle, but my Jimmy didn't like working for him. Tanner's place was what he called a last-ditch job. If there was no work left, he'd have to go ask Tanner's foreman for work there." "I think your late husband and I would have been great friends," Zoe said, fiddling with the leather reins that rested in her gloved hands. "He was a good man," Millie's smile was wistful. I knew the first time I ever clapped eyes on him that I was going to marry him. It was as though I'd been hit by a tornado. He made me feel alive, like I was about to burst out of my skin with excitement. I would do anything to spend a few minutes with him. Her words rocked Zoe. She'd never felt that with Frank. She'd never had the butterflies or that heart sputter of passion over someone. It made her sad to know that Frank had never done that for her, and she wondered now if it had been the same for him. Had he settled too? You must miss him. Every day, I'll always hold him in a corner of my heart, but I'd like to love again. Petey needs a role model, someone to look up to. You're doing a fine job with him, Zoe tracked the small boy's movements. Frank would have loved to have had a son, and it made her heart ache that she'd not been able to do that one thing for him. Had she been able to, maybe their lives would have been much different. I try. Some days, he drives me crazy, just like his pa did. Getting back to my earlier point, I'm saying that it wouldn't surprise me if Victor Tanner was involved. Zoe sighed heavily. I cannot prove anything, and now? She cut off the rest of the words, unwilling to admit to this young woman that she was broke. Now? Came the soft prompt. Zoe met her kind gaze and saw the understanding and, yes, compassion. Millie had lost much more than she had. This warm-hearted woman held no judgment. Frank borrowed against the ranch. Zoe shrugged in irritation. I was ignorant of all of this. In truth, Frank wouldn't allow me to become involved, and foolishly, naively, I just left it to him because he's the man, Millie finished for her. Exactly. Zoe rubbed her eyes, exhausted at the thoughts that battered her senses. I have no clue on how to manage these lands. Vultures like Victor Tanner are circling like scavengers picking at the carcass. I have no ranch hands to run the place, which is a blessing because I have neither the stock nor the funds with which to pay them. If you had the money, what would you do? Millie expanded when Zoe met her question with a blank look. If you had the funds, would you work the ranch? Zoe's eyes tracked the fields, rolling away from them. The trees carpeted the foothills of the mountains that soared at the horizon, the gray peaks disappearing into puffy clouds. I wouldn't have the faintest clue where to start. Then sell? Zoe lifted her eyes in horror, immediately rejecting such a notion. I can't. This was Frank's life, growing from his father's dreams and hard work. I just couldn't do that to his memory. Millie's compassionate expression lessened her next words. Frank is gone, Zoe. She opened her mouth to support her cause for hanging on to these lands, but stopped. Instead, she sagged back against the bench rest. Why was she hanging on to these lands? She didn't have an iota where to start. And if she did, is this what she wanted for herself? Think about it. Millie patted her arm, her gaze seeking out Petey. You don't have to sell everything. Just enough acreage to ease your financial burden and start again. I need to rescue my son, she added when she saw her son dancing around a water trough. I'll show you around and then put the wagon away. See to the horses. Zoe told her as her mind whirled with the notion of giving them all a little bit of space to think. She let them into the cabin and explained the layout of the house as Petey raced from room to room, passing comments on everything from the contents of the house to how he was planning on sleeping that night. It felt odd to hear voices echoing through the rooms once again, and she knew that Frank wouldn't approve of her opening his house to strangers. Millie made light work of firing up the stove and was already gathering items onto the kitchen table for their supper when Zoe let herself out of the back door and crossed to where she'd tethered the horse and cart. She unhitched the horse from the wagon and led the animal into the barn. Her mind raced. Choices were being rebuffed by the thought of breaking up what had been Frank's whole life. Despite the sorry state that he'd left her in, she'd loved him and had chosen to be his wife because of that. Often, her needs had been placed behind that of the ranch and the men who helped Frank run it. She added hay to the manger and filled the bucket in the corner as the dogs sniffed out the crooks and patiently waited for their feed, too. She slipped the harness along her forearm and clicked her tongue for the dogs to follow her, and she latched the stable door behind her. It was guilt, she realized. She felt guilty about breaking up the property that Frank had fought so hard for. That, and she didn't want Victor Tanner to triumph. The dogs raced into the tack shed, heading straight for the far corner, their growls filling the small space. She looped the harness on the rusty wall nail and called for the dogs, but whatever creature they were clawing and snarling at had their full attention. "Come," she raised her voice and slapped her thigh. "Dogs, bear, come here." She emitted a growl of her own as she stomped over to where they had their snouts jammed in the corner and, muttering under her breath, brushed the blankets and other accumulation of farm life out of her line of sight to try and grab one of the dogs by the scruff. She peered into the recess of the gloom to see what they were all trying to attack when something caught her boot, tipping her off balance. There was a flurry of dog yelps as she fell into the pack. She sat on her rump, shouted at the dogs, and dusted off her hands. She looked about her to see what she'd tripped on. With a small cry, she dragged the battered, dusty case towards her. Her fingers danced over the grimy surface of her black leather doctor's bag. Echoes of the argument that she'd had with Frank the last time she'd seen it tumbled in her mind. The argument had started after she dared to complain about having to treat a calf when he wouldn't let her set a man's arm. Their marriage had still been so new, and she was trying to be both Frank's wife and a doctor, though it had quickly become apparent that he'd never meant what he'd put in his letters about supporting her. She unsnapped the clasp, a delighted gasp leaving her when she saw all her equipment was still inside. "You're my wife," he'd shouted at her when she'd asked him where it was after a heated argument. "You do not need to work. What will people think of Frank Solomon's wife traipsing about the countryside touting for money? No, your life is with me now. You're a wife, not a doctor. Your only job right now is to provide me with a son. The bag has gone." As she sat in the murky stable, her tears blurred the examination of the metal tools and bottles filled with medicine. Frank had taken her bag, that last connection to her old life, and made her believe that he'd burned it. She saw now that that blazing argument had been the original nail in the coffin of their marriage, the first time she'd seen the real Frank Solomon for what he truly was. She'd come here with hopes and dreams of tending to the sick and following her calling, and now she had the chance to make those dreams her future. Chapter 6. Victor Tanner's home was as grandiose and flashy as the man himself. The oldest son of the Tanner family, he'd taken that title and built himself a home worthy of a king. The housekeeper swept a disapproving look over Zoe when she'd opened the door and instructed her to stand in the hallway and wait. Zoe tugged off her gloves, eyeing up the garish ornaments on the sideboard and expensive rugs that dotted the gleaming floors, none of which she'd noticed on her last visit to his house. Delicious scents drifted through the house. Victor stomped in through the front door, his voracious gaze devouring her and making her skin crawl in the process. "Mrs. Solomon, this is a welcome surprise to come home and find you waiting for me." He grinned as though he knew the reason she was here. "This won't take long," Zoe said, annoyed at the quake in her voice. She'd ridden over here, rehearsing the words to ensure that she got a fair price for the lands she was ready to part with. Millie had been a good-sounding board and had a little knowledge of the cost of acreage, which helped Zoe come up with an amount. "Let's make ourselves more comfortable in the salon." He placed a hand at the base of her spine, and she scooted herself forward to step out of his reach. He dropped his hat on the sofa and lowered himself into the plush seat and patted the seat next to him. "Sit over here with me." Zoe firmed her lips and shook her head, hovering at the door instead. "This isn't a social visit, Mr. Tanner." She linked her fingers in front of her to stop them from trembling. Victor chuckled as he extended his legs out and reclined, a wave of his hand giving her the floor. "Then I'm all ears. I'm here to negotiate the sale of my property." His reptilian grin chilled her blood. He sat up quickly. "I see, all business then. Okay, name your terms." "I want $20 an acre." He roared with laughter, wiping his eyes with the pads of his thumb, and he pressed to his feet. "Oh dear, no, that's ridiculous." His condescension prickled her temper. "That's the going rate for developed farmland in this territory. I'm giving you the option of first refusal because of your location. Others are interested." "Like whom?" I know all the landowners in the territory. We work very closely together for the good of the land. No one else is interested." His words hung in the air between them, their meaning evident. She was in a tight spot, and he knew it. "Did you steal my stock?" His eyes traveled slowly over her body, glinting dangerously when he finally met her gaze. "You come into my home and lay outrageous accusations against me. Frank's ranch hands are all here working, are they not? And no one knows my property better than Roy and Willie Watts. You ought to take more care of your things, Zoe. That's the crux of it. Course, had you accepted my proposal, those thieving rustlers wouldn't have had the chance to take your stock, would they now? You would have had a man there to protect you from those marauders. Were you scared? Hearing the dogs barking and peering through the bedroom window. At least I assume that's what you were doing," he added at the end. Her breath caught in her throat. This was as close to an admission as she would ever get from him, but nothing could be done. $20 an acre is the going rate. I checked. That might be the case. He sauntered closer to her, head tilted, eyes gleaming. And I admire you for trying, but this is a negotiation. You need to replace the money that your late husband squandered, which puts you at a disadvantage in this situation. Zoe's eyes narrowed at his glib comment. How do you know about that? He came to a stop in front of her, his avid gaze roving her face that reddened under his scrutiny. Because I'm a wealthy and powerful man, Zoe. In this situation, I can be a good friend to you, or I can make you miserable. She swallowed, her pulse quickening under the veiled threat as he loomed closer. What do you want then? He tutted softly and shook his head. You hold fast on your price. Don't ever let the competition know that you're willing to lower the price too soon. Zoe took an involuntary step away from him. 20 is my price. How much land are you parting with? I'm keeping 200 acres. The rest is for sale. He crowded her again, and she backed away once more. What does that include? She knew that he was trying to intimidate her, and she lifted her jaw, mentally giving herself a shake. She was in charge here. Do you want the land or not? Victor, other buyers are interested. You didn't answer my question. What does the sale include? Her breath left her as her back hit the wall. She had no more room to evade him, and he took immediate advantage, framing her head with his forearms as he leaned against the wall, his gaze moving to her mouth and then lower still. You're crowding me, she muttered, fighting the urge to cry. This is most improper. Move back, now. He chuckled, his head leaning in to whisper in her ear. This is a negotiation, Zoe. You've named your terms. Now I name mine. Mr. Tanner, she ground out, I don't know what you hope to achieve. I don't need to pay a cent to you. You're broke. You will have to give up the lands soon enough, and I'll get them anyway. So you can become my wife and live in all this luxury now? Or I'll see you in Buck's saloon and rent you by the night before the end of the year. Boss? The growling voice was announced with the footsteps that pierced the sound of her blood thundering in her ears. Victor stilled but didn't move. What is it? The mayor is here. He wants to see you. Said it's urgent, the voice added when Victor sighed heavily. Tell him to wait. I'm busy, Victor spat. Zoe heard the shuffling of feet. You want to make the mayor wait, boss? This time, Victor lifted his arm to snarl at the other man. Isn't that what I said? Zoe ducked her head and peered through the space Victor had made between them, trying to catch the eyes of the other man. She found the bluest eyes she'd ever seen watching her warily. Ma'am, are you okay? I pay you to move steer, Wilson, not stand here and poke your nose into something that doesn't concern you. The other man didn't move, though a muscle ticked in his jaw as it tightened. Miss? Zoe gave him a slight shake of her head, imploring him for help with her eyes. Victor growled and dropped his arms, rounding on the cowhand. Get out, Wilson, if you value your job. Wilson sighed in exasperation, sidestepping to catch Zoe's eyes. Ma'am, are you okay? Mrs. Solomon and I are in negotiations, Wilson, he smirked. Zoe darted around Victor and moved towards the door, but yelped when he grabbed her by the wrist. She was just about to accept my proposal of marriage, weren't you? No, I most certainly was not. Zoe tugged against his hold, hissing in pain when his grip tightened. Let me go. Wilson stepped in between them, pushing his face into Victor's. For a moment, each man glared at the other. Whilst Tanner was broader, Wilson had more than a few inches advantage in height. Tanner was forced to look up. "You heard her. Let her go." Victor did instantly, impotent fury boiling in his eyes as he flung her hand away. Prosody rate. "Your job comes with a cabin, doesn't it, Wilson?" "That's right." Victor barked a laugh and Zoe winced at the caustic sound. "Not anymore. You're fired." "Fine by me," Wilson growled. He swung away from Victor and nudged Zoe through the door. Her skin prickled with anticipation as she hurried away, the ranch hand right on her heels. They'd made it to the front door before Victor called out, "Kit?" The other man stilled with his hand on the doorknob. "What?" he said without looking back. "You got 10 minutes to clear the cabin. Then take your kids and don't ever set foot on my land again." Kit shoved Zoe through the door and slammed it behind him. Zoe was inert, staring at him in horror. "You have children?" Chapter 7. "Yes, I do." Kit growled at her and stomped off the decking, crossing the yard with long strides. Zoe had to trot behind him to catch up. "You must go back in there and get your job back. You have responsibilities." Several of the ranch hands stopped what they were doing to eye their progress across the enclosure. "I know what I have, lady." "Mr. Wilson, is it? Did you unhouse your children to save me?" "Looks that way. I can't have that on my conscience. Let me go back in there and plead your case." She collided with him as he stopped suddenly. He turned back, lip curling as he set her a few feet away from him. "Did you like what he was doing to you in there?" Zoe's mouth flapped as her mind floundered for words. "No," she stuttered. "Of course not." "Then you're not going back in there," he said. "Take yourself home whilst you can." Zoe watched him walk off, mouth agape. A glance back at the main house showed Victor Tanner lounging against the door jamb, arms folded. He was too far away for her to see his expression, but the thought of dealing with him alone once more made her breakfast oatmeal bubble in her belly. Guilt stabbed her into action, and she hurried after Kit through the gate and across the field towards a cluster of cabins and huts. A family was now homeless because of her. "Mr. Wilson, wait!" "What is it?" he muttered, his stride not faltering. Zoe spotted the small boy racing across the field, arms open and utter delight on his face. Memories of waiting for her father's return twisted her insides and prickled her eyes. "Pa, I made a sword, see?" The son proudly held a large branch. Kit Wilson ruffled his son's hair on the way past but didn't stop. "That's great, Henry. Where's Bonnie?" "Inside. She's mad at me." "Who's that?" Henry jabbed the stick behind his father. "Mrs. Solomon, come inside. I need you to grab all your stuff." "Why?" Henry asked. "Because I said so," Kit replied in an even tone. "Don't argue with me. Bonnie?" A young girl of about 12 poked her head through the open door at the front of the cabin, a broom handle in hand. Her expression registered surprise. "Why are you back so soon? Is it lunchtime?" "No, not yet," Kit said, veering to the side of the property, pointing to her as he spoke. "Pack your things. Do it now, please. I'm going to get the wagon ready. Dump everything out here so I can load it up." A horse nibbled at the pile of hay bunched in the corner of the paddock it was contained in. She must have understood the urgency, because she didn't say another word. After a brief inspection of Zoe, the young girl urged her brother to help her round up their belongings. Zoe hovered. She should leave. She'd come here that morning to negotiate a quick sale and raise some cash so that she could get on with her plans. Instead, she'd been terrorized by Tanner and ruined a family in the process. It didn't feel right to just leave them to deal with the aftermath. She stepped into the modest home of Kit Wilson. The interior was clean and practical. There were no garish ornaments to shout extravagance like Tanner's place or even her own home. She saw a small unmade cot in the corner and a door off to one side towards the back. Bonnie was rushing about the kitchen, loading utensils and pans into a bucket. She passed by Zoe, her eyes almost the same bright blue as her father's, and set the bucket by the door. Henry was less casual about his inspection of her. "Why do we gotta leave? We only just got here. Do you know?" Zoe swallowed, unwilling to lie to the small boy. She gave him a slight nod. "Your father helped me." She opened a drawer in the sideboard under the window. After a moment, she lifted out the items of clothing. "What shall I do with these?" Bonnie pressed a trunk towards her with her boot. "Put them in there." Zoe did as the girl said, emptying the rest of the drawers as quickly as she could. "Henry," Bonnie reprimanded her brother, who'd stopped to stare at Zoe. "Grab those blankets. Hurry now." Kit brought the wagon round to the front and frowned at Zoe as she was hauling the trunk through the door. "Didn't I tell you to go?" "You did," she retorted. "And I didn't." Kit easily hoisted up the trunk and placed it in the bed of the wagon. When he swung back, he stalled when Zoe offered him the bucket that Bonnie had put there. But he didn't say anything, and between them, they cleared the decking and stacked it all into the wagon. By the time they'd finished, more of the ranch hands had gathered to watch them. Zoe recognized a few of the faces as some of the men who had worked for Frank. "How did you get here?" Kit muttered to her, lifting a chattering Henry into the front. "I rode. My horse is tethered to the post in front of the main house." His eyes danced over the row of men who stood at the fence line. "Go get the horse. I'll meet you around the front. I want to make sure you get off the land safely before we part ways." Zoe reeled back as though he'd slapped her. "I'll meet you, but then you're all coming to Big Oak Ranch." "Where's that?" a nosy Henry asked. "Henry, it's rude to eavesdrop," Bonnie said, sliding onto the bench beside her brother. "We're not going to your ranch," Kit said. "Oh, yes you are," Zoe fisted her hands on her hips. "It's my fault that you've had to do this. You can come and stay at my place." Kit stared at her. The intensity of it unnerved her, and she felt the blush crawling up her neck. It was a peculiar reaction for her to have, and her brows pushed together. "It's not your fault. It was Tanner," he said, and she tried to focus on his words. "You're not obligated." She studied his face. Green eyes framed with long, dark lashes, harsh planes, and an unsmiling mouth wrapped in his beard, with a scar that bisected his brow and made things a little more interesting. She blinked, her mind snapping out of its reverie as he pushed past her and climbed into the wagon. "Get your horse, Mrs. Solomon." He clicked his tongue, and the horse set off. She had to jog round to the front of the house. Victor Tanner hadn't moved, though she could see the unpleasant smile on his face when she risked a glance at him. Kit Wilson did as he said, and waited in the yard for her in silence. She swung into the saddle and fell into line behind the wagon. She didn't look back, though felt the weight of Victor's stare boring into her back until they were out of sight of the ranch house. "Mr. Wilson?" She kicked her horse into a trot until she was alongside the wagon. "Please, allow me to offer you some refuge, at least until you've secured work." "We'll be fine. I'll go into town and find us a hotel room for the night. I'll be back at work soon enough." Zoe let loose an annoyed sigh, which drew a look from him that matched her mood. "You might be fine, but your children need a home," she pushed on, even as he voiced another protest. "A hotel isn't the place for children. I have a bunkhouse and a cabin that is vacant. It will save you the cost of accommodation. I have no money to compensate for your kindness, but I can offer you a roof over your head. It's yours for as long as you need it, be it one night or longer. You would be doing me a favor by moving into one of them. They're not luxurious, but they're solid. I don't need charity." "Mr. Wilson," she demanded, "are you going to be so stubborn that you'll have your children sleep under the stars tonight instead of in warm beds?" Kit looked at the two upturned faces beside him, and then his eyes returned to the road. He was silent for a few moments, and Zoe was about to speak again when he agreed and turned the wagon for Big Oak Ranch instead. Dusk had settled on the lands, and the cooler night air was filled with insect songs that welcomed the darkness. Zoe was warmed instead by the bundle in her arms and the softly snoring little girl. Zoe brushed a gentle finger across Libby's downy cheek and smiled. Libby might have lungs that could rouse the dead, but she was the sweetest little thing. Across the yard, lights glowed from the windows of the cabin, signaling that Kit and his family were in residence. In the end, it had been Henry who'd selected the cabin closest to his newest friend, Petey. Both boys had been inseparable all afternoon as Bonnie and Kit had settled in. The back door opened, and Millie peered through the gloom, stepping through when Zoe turned her head. She put her finger to her lips, and Millie went up onto tiptoe. "Come, sit." Zoe touched the bench she'd been sitting on to watch the sunset. She's never settled on anyone else other than me, Millie whispered as she leaned in to look. It's a blessing. I can get so much more done. Zoe huffed out a laugh. You did well tonight, especially when I dropped 3 more guests into the mix. I don't quite know how you managed to make those meager offerings stretch into such a delicious meal. Millie shrugged. I come from a big family, and my mama had a knack. Is Petey asleep? Eventually, Millie replied. He and Henry are already fast friends. Both women looked to the cabin across the yard. Millie had taken the arrival of the unexpected guests in without question. Zoe knew that Connie wouldn't have been so accommodating to such an event, nor would the other woman have helped make beds and empty the wagon. Kit had made light work of stowing away the wagon and seeing to the animals, whilst Millie prepared supper and Bonnie entertained the boys. Thank you for your help this afternoon. It's appreciated more than you could know. I just couldn't leave them out there, not after what he did. Of course, Millie murmured. Zoe had given her the Cliff Notes version of what had transpired that afternoon. Do you think they're okay over there? Zoe nodded. I told Mr. Wilson to come across if they needed anything. He's quiet, isn't he? Handsome, too. Thinking about the recalcitrant ranch hand made her belly flutter, and she was grateful for the darkness to hide the rush of warmth to her face. Is he? I didn't notice. Millie chuckled and held her hands out for Zoe to pass the baby to her. You will do once you've finished grieving for Frank. I'll take her in, and then I'm going to bed. Good night, Zoe. Night, Millie. Sleep tight. Zoe wrapped her arms around herself, chilled now that Libby's warmth had left. The silhouettes of the outbuildings were melting into the encroaching night, and she suppressed a shiver. Once you've finished grieving. Millie's words had struck a chord. It was hard for her to grieve when she'd fallen out of love with the man her husband had become. She'd longed for the return of the kind man in the letters. That was the man she'd fallen in love with. She didn't like the angry and bitter person Frank had become. She wondered, not for the first time, what had become of that man in the letters. Had she driven him out when she'd failed to give him a child? She was still having to deal with the ramifications of the man who'd taken Frank's place. His reckless actions had put her in a precarious position and had led to being in Victor Tanner's parlor. Yes, it was hard to grieve for a man like that. Just thinking about the incident at Tanner's place this afternoon sent tremors through her. She wrapped her arms around her middle and closed her eyes against the onslaught of memories of being hemmed in by his body. She needed him to buy the property. Movement across the yard drew her eyes, and she watched as Kit jogged down the steps, a basket that was used for firewood dangling from his fingers. A dog barked, though quickly quietened when Kit spoke. He filled the basket from the woodshed and was almost halfway back when he must have spotted her sitting outside. After a moment's pause, he altered his course and walked towards her, and she had to brace herself for her body's reaction to his presence once more. Chapter 8. His face was in shadow when he stopped near the railing. The sharp planes were thrown into prominence by the soft glow coming from the windows behind her. His hat must be in the cabin, and he dragged the longer strands of dark hair away from his face to watch her. Are you okay? She nodded at the quiet question. Just fine, enjoying the quiet after the excitement of supper. Sorry, he said. Henry can be a bit much. We'll be out of your hair by tomorrow. Zoe was out of her seat before she could think. You'll do no such thing, Mr. Wilson. I simply meant that it's nice to be able to sit and hear your thoughts, he finished for her. His words pulled out a reluctant chuckle. I meant no offense by my words. You and your children are welcome here, and you're wrong. Henry is exuberant, yes, but he's a bright child with a delightful imagination. He and Petey were funny. That drew a small smile from him, and she peered closer at him as the panes of his face softened. Millie was right. He was handsome, and Zoe had most definitely noticed. Still, we'll be out of your way as soon as I find work. She sighed, his words dousing the delight of his smile. That's fine. You take as long as you need. To be honest, it's nice having the company. Ever since the cattle theft, it's been uncomfortable here. Millie and Petey are great, but it's not the same as having a man about the place. Millie seems nice, he said, those incredible eyes of his searching the windows at her back. A pang of envy squeezed her insides. Of course, Millie was younger than she was. She already had children. Isn't that what a man looked for? She's a godsend, Zoe replied truthfully. I'm sure when the opportunity arises, she'll opt for a post whereby she gets paid. She's not your housekeeper? Sadly, no. She was in the general store. She couldn't pay her account, and that wretched Red Perkins was acting like the most horrid bully. I offered shelter to her and the children. I can't afford to pay her. I would have hired her, and you, Mr. Wilson, to run the ranch if I could. I'm sure a man of your skill knows how to run one, because I really don't. His hands went to his hips, and he shrugged. Actually, I'm a carpenter. I only started working ranches because some of the jobs come with accommodation, and I could be home for the children every night. I make good money in the summer months and make it last through the winter. It's how I have lived ever since my wife passed away. How long ago? She asked quietly, a morbid curiosity pushing the words out. He lifted his eyes. 5 years. I'm sorry? She laid a hand over her heart as sadness moved there. Henry was so young. He sent her a pained glance and nodded. Barely 3 years old. Bonnie was amazing, just taking on household tasks when I was working. She tried her best. They're a credit to you both, she murmured. Kit lapsed into silence and placed the basket with firewood at his feet. She hardly knew the man, yet wanted to ease the pain she could sense in him. She drew in some air to ease the pang of envy that wound its way through her. It seemed both Kit and Millie had had a great love in their life, yet she'd felt almost a release when she'd learned of Frank's passing. Immediately, she regretted the thought that curled through her. She wasn't glad he was dead at all, but she hadn't ever truly loved him in the way that she believed she should. You know, you shouldn't feel so obligated towards me. Don't get me wrong, I'm very grateful for the cabin, he said quickly when she met his eyes once more. But I was only working there because the job came with a house. Tanner is a nasty piece of work. He can't hold on to house staff because of his behavior. I saw you walking in there. You came to check on me? His left shoulder came up and he looped his arm over the railing. You're not the first woman that he's tried things with. I am the first with rumors, though, she said quietly. Even in the darkness, she saw the impact of her words. Cowhands get bored on the trails, he said by way of explaining. Idle gossip. Frank's men, too? Kit shrugged again, but his expression spoke volumes. Mortification burned inside, and she lowered her eyes. For what it's worth, his voice was gravely, I don't hold much salt with most of them. Some would turn their own grandma over for a dime and a whiskey. It wasn't right what Tanner did, poaching those fellas from your place like that. Zoe nodded, his throat tightening with emotion. No, it wasn't right, but Tanner had her cornered. The futility of it all was frustrating. Unfortunately, Mr. Tanner has the upper hand still. I needed him to buy that land today. I have no money left. I tried to negotiate a decent price, but soon I'll have no choice but to sell at a very low price, or I'll have to abandon the lands if they fall into disuse and then end up with nothing. There are other ranchers in the area, you know. Have you approached any of those? Tanner must have warned them off. He said they're not interested. His low laugh rumbled around his chest. The man is full of hot air and his own self-importance. He doesn't have as much control around here as he likes to think, and he can't make decisions for other men. Tanner wants these acres, Zoe, Kit said softly. His face illuminated when he moved to the foot of the steps. It was the first time he'd used her name. She ignored the sensation that skimmed over her at the sound and tried to focus on his words. I know he wants them. He just doesn't want to pay for them, and he's determined to add me into the deal. Under the soft glow of the light, Kit's eyes appeared brighter. What do you want? Do you want a ranch? She shook her head. I'm a doctor, or at least I was before I married Frank. I want to start practicing medicine again. She braced herself for the haughty laugh or the disdainful tone. It had always been Frank's reaction, but Kit simply nodded in acceptance. Buoyed, she continued. I was thinking about turning the barn into a place where I could work, a base if you like. I think it's a great idea. You do? Yes, I think that if I'd had access to a doctor when Beth was sick, then maybe she'd still be here. You want to sell some of the lands to raise funds?" She smiled, hope filling her. It was Millie that gave me the courage, plus finding my doctor's bag, but she held those words back. She wasn't sure how he'd react to her voicing her beliefs that it had been a message from the Lord. "Okay," Kit nodded. "I can speak to some people tomorrow, if you like. Let's see if we can't squeeze Tanner for the full value and find him some competitors." Kit was right. Tanner had been bluffing. In the end, the ranch owner had folded faster than a deck of cards in a hurricane when he thought that he was going to lose out on what Zoe was selling. He'd bought it for $19 an acre. With that money, she'd paid off the accounts that Frank still had outstanding in the town. She'd paid Millie for her work around the ranch. They had a pantry full of food. The injection of money eased one of her stressors, but she was still a long way off from realizing the dream that had taken root in a classroom in New York many moons ago. Zoe stood in the yard with Kit and Millie. The barn was a sturdy build, but it was drafty and dusty. It seemed only natural to her that Kit would do the work required in the next step of her plan. "Having a clinic to hand means that people can visit me," Zoe explained. "But I've not done any carpentry in almost 5 years, Zoe." His mouth gave a slight twist. "It's a big undertaking. It can't happen overnight." "You can do the work, can't you? You told me the first night you were here that you were a carpenter before you worked the ranches." "You'll still need some storage for feed and hay in the winter," Kit reasoned, and his words deflated the excitement bubble that filled her. She was waiting for him to shoot down her dreams, just as Frank had. Kit and the children had been on the ranch barely a month, yet both people standing next to her had become her confidants in that short time. He'd worked hard to bring the place into some order. They'd bought 5 cows for milk, and he'd mended a few of the fences damaged during the theft. She valued their opinion. "It can't be done?" "I didn't say that," he hedged, running a critical look over the exterior. He walked to the large double doors and opened one side. The ground was dried mud, full of straw, hay, and other detritus from years of being used on a busy cattle ranch. He examined the roof, walls, and floor space. "You're sure that you won't want to get back into running a cattle ranch?" Zoe nodded her head. "Positive. That was Frank's life, never mine." "Very well. You can do it? Turn this into a clinic?" Kit pointed into the open rafters above them, rolling his fingers so they swung away from where the 3 of them stood. "I'd say from this point back. I'd drop a partition here to section this off. We'll keep the doors where they are. You can put another door towards that side and lay down some flooring. In time, you could even lay an extra skin along the interior to add some warmth." Zoe looked around her. Dust tickled her nose and danced in the summer air that wafted in through the open doors. She couldn't visualize what he was showing her, but she trusted him. "It won't be cheap," he said. "And if your budget can stretch to it, I could do with an extra skilled set of hands." She wanted to dance a jig and sing from the rafters that he was studying. She smiled and nodded. "I'll make it stretch if you had someone in mind." Chapter 9. "That's whom you are recommending helping you with the barn?" Zoe folded her arms and didn't bother hiding her contempt for the cowhands standing in her yard. The July sun beat down on their heads, baking the ground until it was cracked and hard. Kit had assured her that this was the ideal time to renovate, and he'd left the ranch that morning, declaring that he was all set to start work when he returned. Butch at least had the good grace to look ashamed. He muttered something out of the corner of his mouth to Kit. Kit patted his shoulder and began to unload the timber that had been stacked into the wagon. "You told me that you trusted me to sort this." Zoe stomped down the porch steps, infuriated that Kit didn't hold the man in the same vein of contempt that she did. "He worked for Frank. He switched allegiance to the other side," she enunciated. "A cowhand's commitment is mostly towards his ability to earn money, Zoe," Kit replied. "His foreman told him that that's where he was going. Tanner was paying more. I bumped into Butch in town. I made him an offer, and he accepted. It was business." Butch watched the exchange warily. Zoe's mouth pinched. Was he one of the men who'd speculated about her virtue and reputation? It didn't feel right to let one of Frank's men back here. Butch jumped into action when Kit prompted him to help him lift the length of wood off the wagon. He hopped up, sending Zoe a quick smile. "Ma'am, fixing a barn is easier than wrestling steer." "I wasn't speaking to you," she retorted. "Mr. Wilson, I'm not happy about this. How do I know that Butch wasn't sent here to sabotage the whole task?" Butch shot upright, indignation rounding his mouth. "Ma'am, I go where the work is, that's all." Kit sighed, lowering the length of the wood back down so that it rested on the sandy ground. "Butch is a hard worker, and he's worked on built barns and cabins before." "No," Zoe stated the word precisely. Vexed, Kit pushed the edge of his hat up and looked at her. "Why is it that you have me here?" "What do you mean?" "I worked for Tanner at the time of the robbery. You didn't lay these insults against my reputation. You put a roof over the heads of my children, and you didn't question my integrity." Her brows knitted in a thoughtful frown. "Did you know about the robbery?" "Not until a day or so later, and I can vouch for Butch. He wasn't involved." "But how do you know?" Kit quirked a brow. "Because he was drunk as a boiled owl that night. He fell in the water butt and his horse was wandering around with the saddle all skewed. It set the dogs up a racket and woke Henry up. I went out to investigate and found the place deserted. Apart from this fool sloshing in the trough like a toddler at a cake stall." Millie giggled, quickly stifling the sound when Zoe shot her a dark look before she looked up at Butch. "Is this right?" Butch removed his hat and swiped his bandana across his sweaty head. "I wish I could deny it, but it's true. I woke the next morning with a dance troupe tapping on my head. Roy and them, they were acting sheepish, but that could have been on account of my behavior. Roy doesn't like his boys to be slinking off in the night. I don't even know if they went anywhere that night," he amended when he realized that he may have just incriminated his friends. "I didn't hear no talk about them being the rustlers. I just have Kit's recollection that the yard was empty." He concentrated on folding the cotton square neatly and tucking it into his pocket. "And how do I know that I won't find you in the water barrel one morning?" "We don't," Kit said. "Niece, prosody or percent. But Butch has made a promise that he won't drink until the job is finished. He gets a bonus if he keeps it." Butch confirmed what Kit has said with a bob of his head. Zoe was nudged back out of the way, and the men began to unload the timber. Millie appeared at her side, and they watched the men disappear inside the barn. "I don't like it," Zoe muttered. "It's my land. I should have a say in who's on here." "Everyone deserves a second chance," Millie said softly. "Besides, Mr. Wilson is a good judge of character. He's not steered us wrong yet." "Us." Zoe was comforted by the small word. It had just been the three of them. She'd tried to maintain a distance and allow the relationship to bloom between Kit and Millie, but she'd yet to see anything firsthand. Instead, theirs was a friendship that was helpful and supportive, the same way she saw Millie, too. "The moment he steps out of line, I'm certain Mr. Wilson won't hesitate to escort him off the property." Zoe watched the men haul in another length of timber and bit back a sigh. She didn't like any of it, but what choice did she have right now? "I don't know how you stand it," Millie muttered. "That man was so rude." The young woman's dark scowl conveyed just what she'd thought of Abel Webb's caustic words before he'd chased them off his porch. Zoe stowed her black leather bag under the wagon's bench and untethered the horse. "He isn't alone in not trusting a woman doctor, Millie. You've been with me on more than one house visit. That little boy was in agony when we arrived. I would walk over hot coals to have someone tend to Petey if he was sick." Zoe cast a look back over the dwelling that Abel shared with his wife and two children. Even now, she could hear the raised voice of the ornery lumberjack. The Webb child had hammered on the front door that morning and begged them to help his brother who'd been trampled by one of the horses. "I think that's what made Alice Webb call upon us. She knew that only a physician could tend to a broken leg." Millie skied again. "You are the closest doctor for probably 100 miles. Abel Webb had better hope that he doesn't need to call on you in the future." Zoe clicked her tongue and flicked the reins. "I'm sure Abel Webb would prefer to swallow his tongue than have the witchy hands of a woman treat him." The story had been the same ever since Zoe had begun to tend to the people in the territory. Men mistrusted her. Women were convinced that she was trying to steal away their husbands after Victor Tanner had turned her down. More of Tanner's ridiculous lies in order for him to save face. She'd rushed to the Webb property, excited that someone had sought out her service. Her mind had been focused on assessing the child and helping him. She didn't have the luxury of a hospital or a nurse to help. She'd had to do it all. Then Abel had erupted when he'd stormed into the tiny house. After calling her rude names, he'd thrown them both out. She had tried to reason with Abel that his son needed to be watched for signs of infection that could happen with enclosed breaks. Her only solace was that she'd managed to get some pain relief into his small body before she'd set the leg and bound it to stabilize it. She'd snuck a small bottle of the opiate-based liquid into the hands of Alice, as Abel had been too busy rounding up her medical paraphernalia. She pushed down on the wave of rejection that wanted to gnaw at the edges of her mind. Kit had assured her that everything took time. Changing the purpose of a building was the easy part, he said. Changing attitudes takes much, much longer. Late afternoon sun dappled the narrow road that she steered the wagon down. Prosody rate sent. August had battered her heat into the ground throughout the day. She spied the familiar outlines of the squat town buildings emerging through the trees. "I need to pick up some supplies on the way back," Zoe said, turning her mind away from the bitter disappointment of yet another dismissal. Millie groaned as she fanned her face. "Speaking of rude men, I suppose seeing Red Perkins would just about round off our day." Zoe's brows climbed as she glanced at Millie. "You're unusually tetchy. Are you well?" "Sorry," Millie said. "I'd blame the heat, but you're trying to help these people, the same as you've helped me and Mr. Wilson. It makes me mad that they take your kindness and throw it back in your face. You just take everything in your stride." Zoe's lips curved. "Oh, believe me, I get mad. I'm just better at hiding things. I wish you could teach me to do that." "It's not like how I teach Bonnie to make remedies," Zoe chuckled. "It takes years of dealing with closed minds and being told that you can't do something purely because of your gender." She stopped the wagon outside the general store. She ignored the stares and curious glances that were coming their way from the people in the town. The rumor mill hadn't stopped, despite her attempts and assurances that the stories being perpetuated about her were all false. She tied the reins to the hitching post and waited for Millie to join her. Red Perkins was leaning on the counter as they entered the general store. His bored expression told Zoe that he'd seen their arrival through the window. Millie retrieved her list and moved away to start collecting what she needed. "Good afternoon, Mr. Perkins," Zoe smiled. "I wondered if I have had any parcels arrive. More of your medical nonsense, you mean?" The store owner harumphed as he straightened. "There are 2 items here for you. Yes." Zoe ignored the commentary as he straightened. He grimaced and took a tentative step forward, his breath hissing out. She was already aware of what camp Red Perkins resided in when it came to women doctors, but his hobble was stilted. He was clearly in great pain, and she couldn't help the concern that laced her voice. "Are you okay, Mr. Perkins?" "Fine." The sidelong look he gave her told her that he wasn't interested in elaborating. Maggie Perkins tutted at her husband. She was stacking soaps at a nearby table. "You ignore him, Mrs. Solomon. His foot is playing him up again." "Maggie, you hush your mouth. It's nothing to do with anyone else." Red limped off toward the back. As he returned with her heavy parcels in hand, Zoe could tell that he was trying valiantly not to let on how much discomfort he was in. "I could take a look at you," Zoe offered. "You will not," Red snapped. "Red, please." Maggie left her task and walked towards the counter. "He says his joints hurt," she said to Zoe. "I'm old," he snapped. "Everything hurts past a certain age, woman. Stop making a fuss." "They're hot, too," Maggie supplied helpfully. "He woke me up last night because the blankets were hurting the skin on his foot." Red went the same color as his namesake. "Maggie, for heaven's sake, do you mind?" "Is it more in the toes or in your foot? Has it changed color at all?" Zoe had directed the question at Red, but it was Maggie who nodded. Toes, all pink and swollen." Red gave up and sat down heavily on the stool behind him. Is there nothing sacred anymore? Oh, Red Perkins, you just quit your whining. You're not the one who must listen to your hisses and cursing. Mrs. Solomon is a doctor. Maggie swept her hand as though this was explanation enough. Red sent another sidelong look at them. The obstinate set of his jaw let Zoe know that he was mortified by her having this knowledge. At that moment, Zoe felt sorry for him. It sounds like gout, Zoe said. It's an incredibly painful condition where crystals form in your joints. Has it happened before? Red didn't reply, but the small nod he made was at least some progress. That's normal. It tends to come back, Zoe explained. I have something that you can take that will remedy the symptoms. It won't cure it, but it will ease your discomfort. Wouldn't you like to walk about more easily? Don't want it. Maggie threw her hands in the air. Then you can go sleep in the outhouse, 'cause I refuse to listen to your cries. Maggie, Red cried, dumbfounded. I don't want no medicine. It's just old age. No, you take that remedy, Red. I mean it. You're as stubborn as a mule and as thick as the tree that made this counter. She slapped a palm at the wood and huffed impatiently. Millie appeared by Zoe's side, fascinated by the rotund woman who bullied the belligerent shopkeeper. Zoe helped unload the items that Millie had gathered up. How about you tot up the total of this? I have something in the wagon that can help. What is it? It's a liquid called colchicine, she said. Benjamin Franklin used it, if it's good enough for him. That news made the store owner sit up. He looked at Maggie, who nodded encouragingly. Embarrassingly, he pressed to his feet. Fine, but only because it'll shut her up. Chapter 10. The sweet scent of freshly sawn wood filled the interior of the room. The renovation had taken a little longer than expected, but it was because Butch and Kit had put additional windows high in the walls. The result was worth the delay. It lent an airy, open feeling to the room and would allow her to work easily without the need for extra lamps. Through the windows, Zoe could see the angry gray rain clouds. October has arrived, with its storms and winds. Storage spanned the width on one side, the shelves above it filled with brown bottles. The bottles were labeled with the contents and arranged alphabetically. Her treatment plinth was yet to see a single patient. Zoe admired the neatly arranged bottles that Bonnie had refilled that morning. Thank you, Bonnie. It's most helpful. Bonnie folded muslin cloths and tucked them away. Does it look like the doctor's offices in the city now? The young girl was fascinated with Zoe's experiences. She had a keen eye and was a quick learner whom Zoe took every opportunity to encourage. It does, yes, though most offices have a pharmacy contained in them, or at least next door. The druggist makes his money by filling out prescription blanks that the doctor sends, and they will take messages for the doctor if they're out. It's a quid pro quo situation. A what? One needs the other to be able to work. Is that why you don't have many patients coming here, because we don't have a pharmacy? Well, Zoe smiled. You're a little bit like my druggist, filling those bottles and letting me know what needs ordering. Bonnie beamed at this news and looked about the room. You need me? I certainly do. I think I'd like to be a doctor. I like to help people. Though, she bit her lip and grimaced. Zoe prompted her quietly for her to say what was on her mind. Well, people around here aren't nice to you. Are they nicer in the city? Zoe recalled the looks of derision and the insults that were flung at her in the classes that she'd taken. Some are, Zoe replied. There are all types of people from all walks of life. Some are not good. Others are naturally good and kind. It's what makes people so interesting. You sound like my mama, Bonnie replied wistfully. It was the first time she'd mentioned her mother to Zoe. She hoped that meant Bonnie was lowering the prickly walls that had been so carefully erected. She always saw the best in people. It's why the Lord took her so early. All the good ones go first, Zoe agreed gently. Do you think that you could have saved her? I wish that she was still here. The simple statement squeezed Zoe's heart. She crossed the room and pulled Bonnie into her arms when she began to weep. She allowed her to cry, giving her back a rub in the same way her mother used to do when she'd been upset. Sorry, Bonnie wiped her eyes with her fingertips. Pa said I always get like this around the winter. Is that when she passed? Bonnie nodded mutely, her lip disappearing between her teeth as her chin wobbled. Fresh tears fell. I miss her. Zoe brushed back the stray hairs that had tumbled from the confines of her pins. She wouldn't have wanted to leave you or your brother. As for your question, I don't know if I could have saved her, but I would have tried. I don't like this time of year, Bonnie sniffed. You don't like Christmas? Bonnie shook her head. Mama would make it special. We'd bake pies together. She'd decorate the house. This one time, she brought in a tree that had these bugs that ate at the wood. Pa was fit to bust a button when the spring came. Zoe smiled at the memory. We can bake pies this year? Bonnie's brows lifted, disbelief pulling at her features. You are going to bake? Zoe burst into laughter and chucked the girl under the chin. Okay, cheeky. Millie will cook, but I can make some decorations. We used to string popcorn on the trees. My grandma and I would make these woolen dollies, too. I think I'd like that, but what? We've moved about so much, and now that the barn is finished, I guess we'll be moving on again. Zoe hadn't thought about that. She'd been so focused on trying to build the medical business that she'd not considered that her home life might change. Do you want to leave? Bonnie gave her a watery smile. This is the first time it's felt like we're where we're supposed to be, which is silly because this is your home. No, Bonnie, you've all made it my home, Zoe said. She was stunned to realize that she didn't want things to change. They'd all of them fallen into a familiar rhythm, coming together for a common goal. How about we just enjoy our Christmas here, and we'll think about what's to come after the snow clears? Bonnie's answer was interrupted when Kit opened the door. He took in the rosy, tear-stained expression of his daughter, and his eyes flew to Zoe's. What's the matter? Zoe gave a slight shake of her head. I just told Bonnie that I would be baking a pie for Christmas, she said lightly, and was rewarded with a gurgling laugh. Kit blinked, his brows knitting, but he pulled his gaze away. Tom Duffy is here. His wife is having some troubles in town. Apparently, Red Perkins sent him up here to get you. That news sobered Zoe up. Betty Duffy was pregnant. I'll get my bag and ride into town now. It's getting dark. I'll go with you. Zoe glanced at Bonnie, concern ripping through her. Maybe you want to talk with your father? Bonnie gave a quick shake of her head. I'm okay. Go help the lady. It was nice of Mr. Perkins to tell them to come here. I'll finish up in here and then go help Millie with supper. Zoe didn't want to dwell too much on why Red Perkins had said such a thing, though it brought her a sense of peace to know that she must have eased his gout symptoms. She needed to keep a clear head to help her patient. If Betty was in labor, time was of the essence. We can't leave them all here on their own, she said to Kit as she moved past him. I know my way to town. Stay here and keep an eye. Kit followed her out, his long strides moving past her easily so that he reached the outhouse where the wagon was stored before her. Butch has offered to stay here. A woman in labor could take a while. I'm going with you. Zoe reminded herself that he'd been through this with his wife. She also didn't need to see his face through the darkness to know that he would have that obstinate angle to his chin. Henry had perfected the look directly from his father when he was in trouble. She helped Kit drag out the wagon, content with the knowledge that Butch's presence should at least deter any undesirables that might venture onto the property after dark. Somehow, she'd come to see all of the people here as her responsibility. I think that we can chalk that one up as a success, Kit said. The sun was lightening the sky, the rosy tones subdued by the low-lying cloud. Kit had been right in his assumption. The labor had taken most of the night, and she was glad to have him with her. Time had passed quickly, but now that she'd stopped, her energy was flagging, and she wasn't sure she'd have the concentration to be able to make it home. Zoe smiled now and lifted her face to the sky. She pulled in a lungful of the chilled morning air. She might be exhausted, but she felt exhilarated. A bouncing baby boy. Maggie Perkins had been a godsend with her practical skills. She'd followed Zoe's instructions to the letter, and all without question. The baby had been in the wrong position, and Maggie's strength from moving sacks full of flour over the years had been useful. Looking back, it felt empowering to have the older woman place that much trust in her medical skills. You have impressed Red, that's for sure, Kit chuckled. The grouchy storekeeper had been almost dewy-eyed over the newborn. "I've certainly seen him in a new light." Kit smiled, his eyes crinkling in the corners. He didn't smile often, but when he did, it made her pulse sizzle a little in her veins. "I'm not sure he'd appreciate anyone calling his manly reputation into question. Perhaps it comes from never having experienced childbirth close up," Zoe mused. "How many babies have you delivered?" "That was my third," Zoe said. "I don't mind telling you now that I was nervous going into that store. Childbirth can be dangerous for mother and child." The smile slid away slowly, his eyes tracking the horizon. "Lucy and I lost one in between Bonnie and Henry." "I'm so sorry," Zoe said. He shrugged. "I tried to steer her steady for a time after, but I think she never really got over the loss. It's not the natural progression, is it? A child is supposed to bury the parent." "That's right." He was quiet for a moment. Mist clung to the trees, lending an ethereal feel to the morning. "You've never thought about children?" The simple question dulled her pleasure in the buggy ride, and she sat up a little straighter. "Frank and I tried, but it wasn't meant to be." "Sorry, I shouldn't have pried." "It's fine. It was the source of a great many disagreements between us both." Memories of angry words and hurt shimmered through her mind. "Frank believed that I hadn't become with child deliberately. Even saying the words out loud brought on a sense of shame and sorrow still." "I know medicine." Kit's head whipped around, and she met his green gaze with her pained one. He searched her face for a moment before he turned back to the road. "Then he didn't know you very well, Zoe. You don't have it in you to be spiteful. If you hadn't wanted a child, you would have made it clear from the start." Her mouth parted in surprise, and for a moment she was speechless. His eyes remained focused ahead, and she studied his profile. How was it that he seemed to know her so well when she'd not known him long? She fell quiet, her eyes returning to the road ahead. Her mind meandered, pondering the significance of this train of thought. Perhaps she was reading too much into it. She was tired, after all. And she knew that sleep deprivation could do funny things to the brain. Ahead, the familiar tree line parted as they crested the hill, overlooking the spread of Big Oak Ranch. She could see the curl of smoke eddying from the chimney, the animals pottering about the lands. So much had changed, and yet the building remained steady. She could see Butch in with the few cattle that she'd bought for winter and try and start a small herd off again from the sale of her lands. "I shall miss that sight," Kit said so softly that she thought she'd misheard him. "When I move on," he clarified her question. "What do you mean? Are you leaving?" He chuckled. "The barn is finished. You don't have enough of a herd to justify a full-time cowhand, and I have mouths to feed. To quote Butch, I must go where the work is." Zoe linked her fingers in her lap as she recalled the conversation with Bonnie yesterday. "But you all live at Big Oak." Kit steered the wagon into the drive, giving her a sideways look. "Zoe, we can't live here indefinitely. I have no work, therefore no means to pay any rent. Your buildings can generate revenue if you were to get a lodger. And after what happened with Victor, not many ranch owners will hire me now, so I'll have to go further afield for work." She swallowed, her throat arid. She didn't want him to leave. She'd grown used to having them all about the ranch. "I thought you enjoyed your carpentry. Can't you do more of that?" He lifted a shoulder, his green eyes dancing along the buildings and outhouses. "I need a workshop, tools, that kind of thing. I have buildings that will go to ruin. Stay, use one of those, and instead of paying any rent, you can help with the livestock. Besides, I've promised Bonnie that we'll make decorations this Christmas." His eyes sparkled, searching her face. When he smiled, it made her heart quiver in her chest. "That's playing dirty, using my daughter to get your own way." Zoe leaned back, a smile tugging at her pout. "Is it working?" He sighed and pulled on the reins so that the wagon rolled to a stop in the middle of the yard. Dogs trotted about them, announcing their arrival for all and sundry to hear. "Are you sure? The children would love to stay. They've grown so close to Millie, Henry, and Libby. It doesn't seem right, having us all crowd onto your lands." Millie. So that was the true reason for his sparkling eyes. She was allowing him to stay, and he could still be close to Millie. She disguised the shaft of disappointment that lanced her with a dainty laugh. She busied herself climbing down so that he wouldn't see the sheen of tears that shimmered in her eyes. It pained her to realize that she'd developed strong feelings for him when she'd long thought her heart was dormant. Kit Wilson only had eyes for her lovely housekeeper, and she'd just given him free rein to get to know the young woman more. Chapter 11. You know, most businesses prefer payments in cash. Butch held the wicker cage aloft and studied the poultry contained within. The chickens stared back unblinkingly. Not everyone has the funds to be able to pay for my services, Zoe said. Artie Banks was in a great deal of pain. I could help. Butch watched as the Banks wagon turned the corner at the end of Big Oak Drive. I'm not judging you, Zoe, but you'll never get rich by being paid in chickens. I have clothes on my back and food in my belly. I have enough money to be able to survive the winter. The Banks family is barely scraping by, especially now the cold bite of winter is here. She peered at him pointedly as he hovered. Butch had taken up residence in the bunkhouse along with several other cowhands who were out of work in the area. It had been Kit's idea to charge a little less than the lodges in the town and rent the cots out. They even had a meal prepared by Millie, all thrown in with the price. Ranch work slowed down considerably in the winter, and many of them were laid off. The cheap accommodation was a great solution, giving the ranch a trickle of income. Not that Zoe needed it now. Delivering the Duffy's baby had seemingly opened the floodgate to patients. Red Perkins had been singing her praises to anyone who would listen about how much she'd helped him with his gout. Zoe was the only doctor in 100 miles in either direction, and she'd been in demand every day. It also meant that being paid in chickens, pies, and even a goat helped feed the many mouths now on Big Oak Ranch. Butch looked suitably chastened. I'll stick these in the coop with the others, he said, and walked off. The frosty ground crunched beneath her boots as she made her way across the yard, arms full of supplies that she'd picked up on her way back through town. November had slid her icy fingers across the lands, bringing icy snowstorms and lazy winds that went through a person, not around them. This morning, though, the sky was a cloudless azure, and she had to narrow her eyes against the glare off the frozen landscape. Several of the cowpokes called out a greeting to her. She declined their offers of assistance to help her carry the sacks inside. Her eyes, as always, sought out the small hut that Kit had turned into his workshop. The doors were open, but she couldn't see him working. He had a steady flow of work coming in. He'd also fallen naturally into being the spokesperson for the men having to live together in close confines when there wasn't an awful lot to keep themselves busy. Her fences were in tip-top condition, and she no longer had to concern herself with the welfare of her small herd. You're back early. How was Mr. Banks? Millie called out over her shoulder when Zoe backed her way in through the kitchen door. Dislocated shoulder, Zoe replied, sliding the basket onto the table. Butch is dealing with the chickens that Mrs. Banks gave as payment. Millie smiled and turned back. That was nice of you. I imagine Artie Banks wasn't too pleased when you said the treatment was free. That's true enough. He told me how he'd always paid his way. He assured me they were good layers. We do get through enough eggs, what with all those hungry mouths, Millie chuckled. Her eyes moved through the window, and Zoe wondered if she was searching for Kit. Even though they all still ate at the large table every night and talked at length, Millie was so busy during the day with the house and with feeding the bunkhouse inhabitants that she wouldn't have much time to spend alone with Kit. Is it too much for you? Zoe asked her. Thinking about it, you're the one who's had to pick up the reins with it all. No, those cowpokes are just pussycats, really. Millie laughed and lifted out the spoon that she was stirring the stew with and pointed it at her. They all keep an eye on Petey and Henry. You can't put a price on that kind of peace and quiet, believe me. All those men are grateful to be fed a home-cooked meal and to see out the winter with a warm bed under a dry roof. She nodded, a look of appreciation sliding across her face. You did a good thing there. Some of those men had nowhere to go. It's nice to see it being used again. Oh, Red Perkins sent this for you. She handed Millie a small packet. Millie's smile widened when she turned to look. Oh, it came. What is it? Millie tapped the side of her nose, laughter dancing in her eyes as she took the package and set it on the side. "Never you mind, Miss Zoe." Her smile vanished when she did a double look through the glass at Zoe's back. "Something's wrong." She wiped her hands on her apron and was out through the door in one fluid motion. Zoe looked at what had upset her, but instead of a squabble with the children, which is what it usually was, she saw a familiar face standing nose to nose with an angry-looking Kit and an angrier Butch. She followed her housekeeper through the door and hovered on the decking. The men were too far away for her to hear, but she didn't need to know that they were engaged in a heated argument. "Maybe he needs a bed for the night," Millie murmured, unwilling to leave the safety of the deck. The woman had such a soft heart. She tried to always see the good in others, though Zoe knew that Roy Jones didn't have a kind bone in his body. Some things were best left to the men. But responsibility pushed her off the wooden steps and out across the snowy ground. Roy Jones had been Frank's right-hand man for many years. It wasn't Kit or Butch's fight. "Take your sorries and you tell Tanner he can shove." "Butch," Zoe interjected, cutting off any profanity. "We have children present." Petey and Henry were being shielded by the bunkhouse men, reassuring hands holding them out of harm's way, whilst Kit and Butch dealt with the problem. Kit didn't move. Roy was just leaving. Roy's jaw moved rhythmically with his habitual wad of tobacco tucked into his cheek. "No, ma'am, I wasn't. I got a message for you." Kit stepped in front of him, cutting off his line of sight to her. "She doesn't want to hear it." "Kit," she said softly. She could tell from the way his shoulders tightened up that he'd heard her. "What's the message, Roy?" Roy gave a furious Kit a gloating look before he stepped around him. "Mr. Tanner requires your services." Zoe's brows shot up. She'd not heard from Tanner since Kit had escorted her off the property. Her answer was still the same, even after he'd bought her lands. She was shaking her head even before she'd opened her mouth, but Roy cut her off. "It's not like that. He's hurt, real bad." "Hurt how?" "He was out in the corral this morning on account of it being such a nice day and all. He got in between the stallion and a mare in heat." Zoe ignored Kit's derisive snort and didn't quite catch what he muttered to Butch. Roy must have heard him because he spoke to them. "You know how he is when he gets an idea in his head. Won't be told." "He's injured?" Zoe asked. Roy's leather face compressed, and he nodded. "Very badly, yes. Right now he can't even stand up. His legs won't work." Chapter 12. He's paralyzed? "He's lying in the corral, won't let any one of us get him up. Says it could make him worse. He took a blow to the face, cut his eye up pretty badly. You're the only doctor for miles around. Will you come?" Zoe's eyes moved to Kit. That was why he was so angry. Victor Tanner had her trapped the last time she'd been in a room with him. Kit's eyes glinted at her, but he remained quiet. He was allowing her to choose. Right there and then, she knew that she loved him. "I'll get my bag," she said. Roy's yellow teeth flashed in his lined face. "I bought the wagon. I'll take you." "Oh no," Zoe shook her head. She'd seen the perturbed look in those green eyes over her decision to go to Tanner's. "Kit will be bringing me." Her finger extended up before Roy could protest. "That is my decision. Take it or leave it." "You're going to leave a respectable man like Mr. Tanner lying in the dirt?" Zoe swung her arms wide, encompassing the gathering that watched them. "These are men, good and honorable, turfed out on their ears after making Victor Tanner a wealthy man last summer." She was rewarded with a rumble of agreements that rippled through the group. "The last time I was alone with Victor, he was most unpleasant. I don't trust him any further than I could throw him. To that end, I don't trust you either, Roy." Kit and Butch folded their arms, grinning like the cats who'd found a bowl of cream. Roy spat out a glob of brown juice and sighed. "Victor told me to get you. I promise you this ain't no ruse to get you alone with him. He's honest to God hurtin', but if that's how you want to do this, who am I to argue?" "Kit, can you fetch the buggy whilst I get my bag?" "Butch, I don't know how long I'll be. Millie might need some help carrying the supper across." "Don't you worry about it, Zoe. I'll look after everything here." "Victor, I won't treat you if you're going to use that kind of language," Zoe called out as she climbed down out of the buggy. Kit hopped out and followed behind her with the black leather bag. Roy had driven hard and fast back to Tanner's place, though it was only when she saw the pinched expression of Tanner that she saw he'd been serious when he'd explained the extent of Victor's injuries. The ranch owner was sprawled on his back over in the far corner. His forehead was steadily oozing blood, and it had dripped into the ground beneath his head. The last woman to tell me what to do was my mama, Victor growled from where he lay on the floor. That ain't about to change anytime soon. Zoe pushed open the gate and picked her way across the pitted ground. She came to a standstill at his side and fisted her hands on her hips. Then we're at an impasse, because everyone I treat must do what I say. His eyes slid to hers and away. When they slid back, he grunted at her. That's what I thought, she murmured. She leaned over, placing a hand on his forehead to examine that cut. You came. You asked, she replied, murmuring her thanks to Kit when her bag appeared at her side. How's your vision? His eyes moved towards her chest, and his husky laugh rattled in his chest. Just fine from this angle, Mrs. Solomon. Immediately, she pulled her hands back. She collected up her bag and pressed to her feet. She'd taken a few steps before Victor called out, Wait, you're leaving? That's right, she looked back. I have patients that need my help. I can pay. I know. Victor let loose an exasperated sigh. Fine, I'll behave. Please, just help me. Zoe's breath hissed out. Your Majesty. Kit stood patiently watching her, expression calm and impassive. I mean it, Mrs. Solomon, Victor tried again. Zoe resumed her position next to the prone man. What happened? Do you remember? That idiot stallion come at me, got me with a couple of blows. When I landed, I couldn't feel my legs. You're the one who got in the way of a rampant animal, Zoe said out loud what Kit must have said to Butch earlier. Did you lose consciousness at all? No. Any blurred vision? Did you hear me? I can't move my legs. That blam-jam animal broke my back. Victor's wrath was lost on her as she examined him. Language, she warned him. Can you roll him for me? Roy and Willie bent to help, but Victor let forth another string of curses. No, it hurts too much. Your legs hurt? Yes. Her tongue rolled around her teeth, and she looked at Kit. His brows quirked at the gleam of mirth that shone in hers. I'm a doctor, Victor. I just need to see what kind of spinal injury was inflicted on you. To do that, I need Roy and Willie to move you. They'll be gentle and quick. I said I'm in pain. I'm not moving. Zoe straightened up, leaning over him. Do you plan on lying here for the rest of your days, then? His lips twisted and he shook his head. He groused and cursed as they rolled him. Zoe tugged at his undershirt, which produced another string of swearing. When they rolled him back over, his face was damp with sweat, and he had fresh blood oozing from the cut on his head. Will I walk again? Zoe exchanged another look with Kit and scratched at her head. She ruminated on her thoughts before she answered him. Did you steal my cattle? The question rocked him. His eyes cleared. You're asking me that now? Zoe lifted a shoulder. I was just wondering if you had any confessions you'd like to make, considering your injuries? She could tell she'd worried him when his eyes widened. I'm going to die? Did you steal my herd? His jaw flexed. Yes, he said tightly. I see. What made you send for me? Because I'm paralyzed. I needed a darn doctor, and you're the only one for miles. If you want me to treat you, you're going to have to pay me for what you stole from me. You already got your money. A fair price for my land, yes? Victor snorted, his eyes sliding to Kit. Perhaps you ought to look up the definition of a fair price. Those are my terms, Zoe said primly. You're negotiating with me on my deathbed? Shame pooled in her belly. She reminded herself what this man's actions had put her through, trying to coerce her off her lands, frightening her, and leaving her almost destitute, spreading vicious rumors and turning the town against her even more, pinning her to the wall of his saloon and terrifying her spitless. She folded her arms and firmed her resolve. Looks that way. Pay me for the cows you stole, and I'll give you something right now to ease your pain. You're something else, he muttered, though she could have sworn that his voice held a hint of admiration for her. Fine, I'll pay you. Where's the pain stuff? Kit chuckled. You knew all along, didn't you? Zoe huddled deeper into the blanket that he'd pulled from the box under the bench they shared. She'd been picturing the roaring fire and tucking into a bowl of steaming stew when they got back home. What do you mean? You knew he wasn't paralyzed. She smiled in answer. His laugh deepened, the sound rich and delightful. The night air was icy, the lantern pinned to the buggy wobbling across the blanket of fresh snow. They hardly needed the lantern. The moon sat in its inky black blanket, casting a luminous glow across the land. How did you know? The fact that he could feel his legs is a good indicator. I pinched his toes to make sure. He'll be sore for a few days, but he'll walk again. He just panicked. I was more worried about the head injury. He could have lost an eye. Fool man, she added quietly. Well, he was taught a valuable lesson today, Kit murmured. He clicked his tongue, encouraging the horse as he drove them home. Victor Tanner had roared and whimpered, protested and pleaded, but he'd walked into the grand house between Roy and Willie, and Zoe had left with the money for her stock and a little of her dignity restored. Thank you for asking me to come with you. You know, when Roy was in the yard earlier, I didn't want you going to Tanner's alone again. Zoe studied his profile, the angular face all shadows and light in the ghostly night. I'm not a stupid woman. I wouldn't race back into the lion's den. You gave up a lot to get me out of Tanner's home. I don't know what I would have done had you not been there that day. He gave a little nod, though she wasn't sure if it was the rocking motion of the buggy or in agreement with what she'd said. He met her eyes then, his lips moving in the beard. But it was the sensation of being his complete focus that sent her pulse skittering sideways. She knew now what Millie had said that day they'd first met, about how just being in the attention of the man she'd loved for just a few moments made her feel as though she could burst through her skin in excitement. Kit set her alight in a way no one ever had before. He grinned at her. After today's negotiation techniques, the last thing someone can call you is stupid. He returned his attention to the road, a smile teasing his mouth, and she had to deal with the aftermath of losing his attention. Instead of being victorious, she felt hopelessly in love. Chapter 13. You went sledding? Henry's expression reflected his incredulity over thinking about Zoe careening down hillsides while sitting on a piece of wood. Zoe laughed. I know I seem ancient to you, but I was young once upon a time. I was quite the daredevil in my youth. Outside the window, flurries of snow tumbled from the sky, obscuring anything beyond the yard. The children sat around the long kitchen table, each in various states of making and decorating. What's a daredevil? Petey asked wide-eyed. Not that kind of devil, Bonnie rubbed his back. She means that she did things that were sometimes a bit wild or dangerous. Zoe nodded, an indulgent smile rounding her lips. The young woman was astute as well as a quick learner. The back door opened, and a blast of frigid air followed Kit into the kitchen. He sniffed the air appreciatively before casting an eye around the festive proceedings. Smells like sugar and cinnamon in here, he stamped off his feet as he closed the door. He hung his hat on the peg at the door and dragged a hand through his dark hair. His eyes lingered on Zoe before he crossed to the table to inspect the morning's baking endeavors. Papa, look, I made a snowman. Kit grinned and dusted the cookie crumbs off Henry's chest. And just how many did you eat before you got to that one? Henry held up 4 fingers. Just this many. Miss Zoe said that we should tell Millie it was just this many. Petey held just his index aloft. Kit's eyes danced with mirth when he looked at her across the room. Bonnie and Henry roared with laughter. Is that right? Encouraging dissent in the ranks, Miss Zoe? In my defense, he'd gobbled up 2 before I had a chance to stop him. She dusted off her hands and wiped them on her apron. I've no idea how Millie juggles all of her chores about this place and keeps an eye on this lot at the same time. You really do need eyes in the back of your head, and Petey, we said that part was secret. Oh, he dragged out the word and then looked back at Kit. Don't tell Mama, will you? Kit straightened up, his deep laugh rumbling in his chest as he ruffled Petey's hair. I won't. Where is Millie? She said she needed a little time alone. I wasn't doing anything. She nodded her head at the frosted window and the wintry day beyond as if that was explanation enough. I can't see people calling by for a doctor in this unless it's an emergency. Hence, she spread her hands, making Christmas cookies to keep us all entertained. We have a tree. Henry announced. He wiggled off the chair and hopped to the door. Come and see. Bonnie said that it's just like Mama used to do. Zoe noted how Kit stilled for just a moment, and she regretted not warning him that this was what she'd planned. She lifted Libby from the seat that Kit had made especially for her so that she could sit with them all at mealtimes. Libby clung to Zoe, her chubby fists curving over Zoe's shoulder. Bonnie had had reservations about the tree in case it upset her father, but Petey had overheard them and had spent the morning vibrating with excitement over bringing a tree into the big house, so Bonnie had agreed. A tree? Kit asked evenly. How did you get that in here? Butch and I chose it, Bonnie said softly. Her fingers were knotted in front of her, her expression uncertain. Is that all right? Kit's face softened and he slipped an arm about her shoulders. Of course it is. Let's take a look then. Bonnie's beatific smile was reward enough, and Zoe felt the tension in the room ease as she followed the group through into the living area. She'd set out candles and pine cones, tied together with red berries and spurs of holly. He admired the boughs of greenery strung around the rafters. Various woolen dollies poked out of the full branches of the green fir tree in the corner. Strings of popcorn and ribbons dangled haphazardly from it, balled up in places where Petey had grown bored of the intricacy. It looks very grand. Zoe said that the ones she had back east weren't as splendid as this one, Henry announced proudly. The children chattered, each pointing out their contributions. Kit listened patiently to them, making appropriate noises when required. Before long, the children drifted back to their cookie duties. Bonnie took Libby, leaving Kit alone with Zoe. I don't want to straighten up where Petey's just thrown the ribbons on. I think it adds to the effect, she laughed. Thank you for doing this, Zoe. You're very good with them. Zoe snorted and shook her head. I can barely keep myself alive, let alone 4 other people. Millie has it down to a fine art. She never asks for a break, so I was happy to let her take a few hours for herself. She'd expected him to be concerned for Millie's welfare, but instead Kit moved to stand in front of her, his green eyes settling directly on hers. She felt the blood rise in a wave of heat through her body. You've given the 4 of them a home, Zoe. I haven't seen Bonnie smile that way in a while. It's mostly my fault. She opened her mouth and had to swallow, her throat dry in anticipation. Words scattered in her mind when he looked at her like that. You had enough to do to keep a roof over their heads. His mouth quirked at the corners, that green gaze feasting on her lips. Whatever he was about to say was cut off by the excited cries emerging from the kitchen. Zoe's fear was alleviated when she rushed to the kitchen door and she saw that the cause of the commotion was Millie's return. Butch closed the door behind them, his face flushed as he loitered. He had a wide grin on his face as he surveyed the room. My, look at all this, Millie exclaimed, her face just as pink. She tugged at her gloves and set them on the side, expertly fielding the attention of each child while simultaneously answering the questions. You've all had a busy morning. Did they behave? Zoe leaned against the door jamb, aware of Kit moving to stand just behind her. Very good. We have a tree too, Petey said, and I had just 1 cookie. His gaze slid triumphantly to the others, prodding them to agree with his lie. I see. Millie's smile moved between them all, eyes shining. Well, I'm glad you're all here. I have some news. She pressed her hands together. The children all stopped to stare. For a moment, Zoe had visions that Millie was leaving, and suddenly the idea of a quiet and empty house filled her with dread. She'd become used to having company, to hear the rebellious shouts and delightful squeals of children filling her home, to have a companion to confide in without judgment or censoring. She didn't want any of that to change. But it was when Millie stepped back that Zoe finally saw the reason for the flushed expressions. It wasn't from the chilled weather at all. Butch here, well, he's asked me to be his wife. Butch's chest swelled with pride, and he looped an arm around her. And she said yes, he grinned. Petey's open mouth swung to Henry and Bonnie, seeking their guidance on what to do in the ensuing silence. Bonnie looked at Zoe, then back at Millie. Millie surveyed the subdued group, her head tilting to one side. What's wrong? I thought you'd all be a little happier. 7%. Henry said that he saw you both in the barn the other day, and that Butch would be my new daddy, Petey said. That means that we'll have to leave now, doesn't it? Zoe looked at Kit, wondering how he felt about the proposal when he'd had designs on Millie, but his eyes were on the children. Millie stepped forward, but it was Butch that placed his hands on her shoulders. He lowered himself in front of the little boy so that Petey was at eye level with him. I knew your pa, Petey. No one will replace him. He was a good man, the best cowpoke that I ever worked with. He wouldn't have wanted to leave you and your sister. That much I do know. That brought out a smile and a little nod. Petey sent a look around the room, his eyes moving back when Butch placed a hand on his narrow shoulder. Marrying your ma, well, what it means is that you'll have me to look after you both, take care of you both, and protect you until you're big enough to do that for yourself. How does that sound? Zoe stared at the ranch hand. She had no idea that he could be so thoughtful and eloquent. She felt her eyes misting up. Are you leaving? Bonnie asked. We don't want you to take away our family, Henry blurted. Petey is my brother now. We made a spit promise, 'cause Bonnie said that we weren't allowed to use a knife and be blood brothers till we got bigger. My work is here for now, Millie said kindly, for as long as Miss Zoe will have us. This is your home too, Millie, Zoe replied. I couldn't manage without you. Millie's smile erupted across her face, and she exchanged a grin with Butch. It must have been a subject they'd spoken about. That's a weight off my mind, I don't mind saying. We can still live here? Petey asked his mother. Yes, we're staying. Millie opened her arms and caught her son in a hug. Congratulations. Kit stepped forward and clapped Butch on the shoulder. Zoe joined in the cheers and celebrations, but found herself looking at Kit for signs of regret and sadness over Butch being the one to capture Millie's heart. If he had them, he hid them well. In the chaos, she couldn't help but wonder what it would be like to marry again, to have another chance at love, to be cherished in the way she'd once dreamed of by Frank. Only, it wasn't Frank she thought of when she was alone in her bed that night. It was green eyes and a smiling mouth that filled her with love. Chapter 14. They're finally asleep. Millie flopped into the chair and blew out a breath. Butch picked up Millie's hand and pressed a kiss to the back of it. It's been a great day, darlin', our first as husband and wife. Millie tucked herself under his arm and laid a hand across his belly. The first of many, I hope. They'd married a few days after Butch had proposed and had taken up residence in the second cabin, though tonight Zoe had insisted they sleep in the big house. The snow had continued all day, swirling flurries that stacked against window panes and sent smoke back down the chimney. Zoe took up her usual spot near the hearth. I agree, the meal was delicious, though we have enough leftovers to feed those cowboys for months, I fear. As far as Christmas days went, this one had been one of the better ones. It was reminiscent of the happy childhood celebrations that she'd enjoyed with her brothers back in Chicago, filled with joy and laughter from the moment she opened her eyes. No words had been spoken in anger today. Last year with Frank, there had been no gift-giving, and Zoe had gone to bed alone once Frank had taken himself off to the saloon following an argument. She remembered crying herself to sleep over his vicious comments. This day had begun with a trip to church, and they all had much to celebrate this year. She may have lost her husband, but she'd gained a family that she hadn't realized she was missing. She'd even managed to persuade a few of the ranch hands to accompany them into town to give thanks to the Lord for all that he had blessed them with this year. Then they'd had a huge meal around the table in the bunkhouse as the children raced around with their new gifts. She'd been given a beautiful stethoscope made of bamboo and bone that Millie had ordered from New York. The thoughtful gesture had brought a tear to her eye, and she'd spent a lovely afternoon teaching Bonnie how to use it to listen to the noises of the body. But Zoe's favorite time had been the black leather bag that she'd had the saddler in town make for Bonnie. Petey had squealed the house down over the building blocks that Kit had made for him. Henry had spent most of the afternoon teaching Petey how to play 9 pins with his new toy. The children had fallen into bed, exhausted with full bellies. Zoe had read the boys a story, though Petey had drifted to sleep long before she'd made it past the first chapter. The fire crackled in the hearth, wood smoke scenting the room. Candlelight lent a warm glow, dancing delightfully against the walls. Lethargy pulled at her limbs as she watched the flames dance along the logs so that she almost missed Kit's voice. "It's certainly been one of the nicer Christmases I've had recently." "Me too," Butch murmured and squeezed his arm around Millie. "I didn't think it would be possible to be this happy again," Millie said, her gaze traveling around the room. "Yet here I am, a wife again, with a job, a wonderful day with friends who've become my family. I've had everything that I could have asked for today, and more." "You've built something special here, Zoe, by allowing all these people to shelter here," Butch said. "You stepped in when Millie needed you most. You could have thrown me off your land, but had it in you to forgive me for walking away from this place. You've given generously with lodgings for those men out there, so they have a shelter this winter." "Thank you, Butch. Those are kind words indeed. I'm just glad I was able to help where I could. That's all we can do. Some people don't have it in their hearts to be as charitable." "You changed my life, Zoe," Millie said. "I'm glad you're happy, Millie. You deserve it," Zoe told her. "I've enjoyed being witness to those changes in your life, and I'm grateful to you for all that you do here. It would be hard to imagine my home without you included in it." Kit cleared his throat as he sat forward. "What about you, Zoe? Are you happy?" Zoe's lips curved. "I was just thinking about how much more wonderful my day has been compared to last year." "That doesn't answer my question." "I am happy. Yes, I was thankful for you all in my prayers in church this morning." Kit watched her carefully before his gaze dropped. Zoe's brows pulled together in a thoughtful frown. "Is something wrong?" Millie quickly stood up and tugged Butch to his feet. "We're going to go to bed. Merry Christmas to you both." She gave her husband a pointed look and nodded at him until he joined her. He allowed her to pull him from the room. "And to you," Zoe murmured. She could hear the whispered argument as it moved along the hall. "What's going on?" She'd not seen the signs that Millie and Butch were romantically running about the place. What else had she missed? Perhaps he was finally fed up with seeing Millie and Butch cozying up to each other, although he'd always been pleasant and jovial to them since they'd announced they were to be married. She steeled herself so that he wouldn't see how upset she was over him telling her that he was leaving her. "Are you going to tell me that you found a job elsewhere?" His eyes shot up then. "No, not at all. Why? Do you want me to leave?" "Of course not," she said in a rush, then hesitated. She knew him well enough by now to know that something was bothering him. "You seem nervous." She heard him swallow and the slow release of breath he'd been holding. "I am nervous," he said. He scratched at his beard. "Are you happy?" He nodded. "I am, but I could be happier." She blinked, searching his face for answers. "In what way?" His hand hovered in the air before he reached out and touched her. Sensation zipped through her as his calloused skin grazed hers. He felt it too, judging by the shock that rippled over his face. "Living here with you for the past few months," he spoke, cradling her hand in both of his. "It's shown me just how much I was missing out on. I was empty before that. The only joy in my life was Bonnie and Henry. And even then, I was sometimes too busy to notice that they needed me. That day I saw you march up to Tanner's front door. I told myself that it was none of my business. The mayor was a good excuse for me to go in and check on you. I'd heard the talk about the town. I knew how mean Frank Solomon could be, but from what I knew of you, you wouldn't jump right into Tanner's arms. Something just didn't feel right." "I'm so glad you did check on me," she whispered. Her skin was pale and soft next to his strong tanned hands. She couldn't think of a time when someone had touched her as though she might break at any given moment. She just couldn't think when he touched her. "I told myself that a classy woman wouldn't be interested in a manual worker like me. You're a doctor, clever, brilliant. When I saw how your mind worked, I knew that you wouldn't be interested. What would you want in a man like me? And yet, there were times when I wondered if you felt things too, and I hoped, maybe one day." Her head was spinning at his words, and she felt faith bloom in her chest. "Hoped what? You say you're happy, but are you truly happy?" She thought about how she'd seen the love between Millie and Butch grow, their furtive glances and sweet touches. how she'd always hoped a marriage to be, but Frank hadn't been a tactile man. She'd learned to keep her hands to herself so as not to incite his bitter anger. I can't stop thinking about you, Zoe. I watch you work, and you're fascinating. You're so capable and decisive. Nothing phases you, even when people are in such pain. You remain the absolute calm in their storm. Let me do the same for you. I could make you happy if you just gave me a chance. Would you do that? Could you take a chance on me? Zoe cupped her free hand to his cheek, his beard tickling her palm even as her heart soared in her chest. Her cheeks grew pink as he turned his mouth into her palm and pressed his lips there tenderly. I've loved you for a while, Kit. I believed you held a candle for Millie. His green gaze cleared as he stared at her. Why would you think such a thing? You have much in common. She can clearly have children, which is what most men look for. He caught hold of the hand that caressed his cheek and brought them both to his mouth. Millie is a lovely girl, but she isn't you. It's not her that fills my mind when I work. Being a mother is an amazing gift from above, and I've no doubt that you would make a fine mother if we were ever blessed with a child. But I love you as you come. I'm proud to live here, to share this land with these people, and to build a life here with you, if you'll have me. I love you, Zoe. She stared at him, those simple words bursting inside her. Her voice was stuck somewhere inside, behind her wonder and joy over having him say them to her. Marry me, and let's share this life with all these people. Replace your sad memories here with ones of joy for years to come. Butch was right. You have done something magical here. Your ability to care, your need to help others, it's infectious. It's what this house was built for. I promise to never make you choose between being a wife and being a doctor. Being a doctor is what you were born to be. Be my wife, if that is what you choose. She smiled, and for the first time in the longest time, she allowed herself to love back. Kiss me, Kit. His green eyes gleamed, and he moved closer. She heard his breath catch when their thighs touched, and she knew that he'd thought about this moment just as much as she had wanted it. His hands framed her face, and Zoe's eyes fluttered closed. Blood that pounded in her ears had thickened with desire. Sensation exploded as his lips brushed hers. Her eyes were still closed when he moved back, a smile curving her lips. When she opened them, Kit's yearning was reflected there. She felt wanted, needed, coveted. I choose you, she whispered. The pad of his thumb grazed her lower lip, and he grinned at her. I choose us. She leaned in, wanting one more Christmas kiss from the man that she loved, that loved her back. I choose forever. The end.